You guys ready? Everyone ready?
Yes, sir.
The royal guys, sorry.
Not that sensitive.
Good? Everyone good? Okay, do you need a sound check or anything? We're good? Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome. I would like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9 a.m., Thursday, October 19th, 2023. And this meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners is being held at the Southern California University of Health Sciences Legacy Hall, located at 16200 Amber Valley Drive, Whittier, California, 90304. The date is Thursday, October 19th, 2023, and the time is, again, 9:01. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, engagement, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the board during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the board taking any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the board circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the board to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the board may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. We will now take the roll call. And Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Dr. Paris?
Present.
Dr. Adams?
Present.
Mr. Sweet is present. Ms. Cruz?
Present.
Dr. Daniels?
Present.
Dr. Sandino?
Dr. Sandino is excused. Thank you. We have a quorum. Moving to agenda item number 2, public comment for items not on the agenda. Just to inform members of the public, you may address the board at this time, and identifying yourself is voluntary, and your name will be recorded in the official minutes of the meeting if it is provided at the time of your comment. And do we have any public comment present at the Amber Valley Drive location? Seeing none. Do we have any call-in?
No, we're just doing it in person.
Just, so only
Yeah,
in person this
yeah.
time? Okay, so no. Okay. Hearing no public comment, we can move to agenda item number 3, and the board chair's report. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody, and I want to personally thank, and on behalf of the board and the staff, thank Southern California University of Health Sciences for hosting us for this meeting. And I secondly want to virtually welcome, I guess, our newest board member, Dr. Claudia Sandino, who's not present. She's excused from this meeting today, but wanted to welcome her on behalf of the board and staff. An update, really, I think the most important thing is to really, I want to emphasize the tremendous amount of meetings and work. This is our 4th public meeting this year, which it would be 5 if you count, we called a special meeting in May, and that, including the committee meetings, that adds up to 17 total meetings scheduled this year. So that's more than 1 meeting a month by a lot. And we've had 14 to date, and we still have 3 more remaining in this year. The Enforcement Committee on November 30th, the CE Committee on December 1st, and the Government and Public Affairs Committee on December 4th. And add to that, we have which we'll go over during this meeting as a later agenda item. We have 19 regulations moving right now. And so I just want to, again, recognize the staff and the board members for the tremendous, and I fully recognize and appreciate the tremendous amount of sacrifice and work that goes into, being able to attain that many meetings and moving that many, regulations all this year, really. So thank you again to the staff and everybody involved. We've also continued to engage our stakeholders, which was one of the objectives of our strategic plan. And I want to especially thank the board members for all the outreach that we've done. We'll hear an update from some of the committee chairs on some of the outreach during this meeting. And we've really been engaged with some of the major stakeholders in the profession and the colleges in California, and that would include, the Council on Chiropractic Education, the National Board of Chiropractic Education, and the Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Boards. And so I think if we can continue, I think for, future for this board would be to see if we can keep the pedal on the gas, and can we continue to move things forward at this pace. And I know it's a tremendous amount of work, and I know there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice that goes in from being in a volunteer leadership position with the board. So I especially want to thank the board members for your commitment and your sacrifice. It doesn't go unrecognized. So thank you very much. The last thing I'd like to note is that today is the Great Shakeout. And so at 10:19, there is an earthquake preparedness drill. And I'm not clear, is that national or is that California?
I believe it might even be national.
Okay, it might be national, but it is where we are
It's
here
definitely
today. It is happening. So somewhere around 10 o'clock, when the time is right, we'll take a break and allow us to get through the Great Shakeout while the meeting's on a break. So just FYI to everybody. And that's all I have. I would take any comments from the board.
I concur. We've accomplished a lot. We have a lot yet to accomplish, and I think acknowledge the staff and all the board members for all their hard work.
And thank you, Dr. Parrish, for leading us forward.
Thank you.
Board member, sorry for the interruption. I think our internet might have dropped out. I can check with our tech guy here, or if you guys want to continue. I'm not sure. It's up to you, but I'm still recording. I'm just not able to put it out on the internet. It just dropped for a second. Would you guys like to take a quick pause?
So as long as we have a recording, we're fine.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be live.
Okay, I'll troubleshoot in the meantime, but it's
Okay.
still rolling, so just
Okay.
wanted to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you. We're good? Okay. Okay. I would open it up for any public comment on agenda item number 3, the board chair's report. Seeing none? Thank you very much again, and we can move on to agenda item number 4. And I will turn it over to Dr. Adams for an update on the September 22nd, 23rd Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Board district meeting that was attended by myself and Dr. Adams.
Thank you. So it was a great experience. Dr. Parrish and I traveled to Boston on behalf of the board. We attended the, is it 3 and 5?
Yeah.
Districts 3 and 5 because of travel restrictions, which have been lifted since that time. So we attended there. It was great. We got to go to Boston instead of South Dakota, which I think was a bonus, positive. It was very enlightening for me as a first experience attending that. We had great presentations and discussion. One of the highlights for me, 2 things really, were the discussion that we had about the chiropractic specialty, which is something that Dr. Daniels and I are working on behalf of the board, and getting feedback from from our specialty boards throughout chiropractic as we address, I think it's Bill 765 that relates to the chiropractic specialty aspects. So Dr. Karen Campion from the NBCE and FCLB is spearheading that. And so that's going to be important for us because they're really going to coalesce a lot of requirements that are going to up-level the chiropractic specialties within the profession and create a more specific standard across the board, which will, I think, bring a lot more clarity and also the ability for boards to monitor and to get feedback and to interact with those specialties, where right now it's kind of multiple things out there with multiple requirements, if you will, to get their specific boards, which vary from different national accrediting agencies within the profession. One of the other things we also got a very robust discussion on was with CCE, with Craig Little presentation about kind of the changes that, and we'll be discussing that later in here as well, the things that are happening within the chiropractic education, which really was spearheaded by the pandemic, which changed and altered a lot of the educational aspects and people going online and some of the benefits to that cost-wise and a lot of discussion about the cost that chiropractic students are facing when it comes to schools and having to spend time in seats versus being able to do some things virtually. So it was a great conversation. We also had one of the directors, Gary D. Benedetto, talked a lot about, from the NBC perspective, the EBAS. And one of my takeaways was that we're really fortunate as a board. There's a lot of states out there that don't have the resources that we have. And so a great takeaway was that we've got a lot of our staff, the organization of our board, the way that we run our meetings, our committees, we're really dialed in. That was a great takeaway. There's a lot of boards out there that are kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of like the Wild West in a lot of ways, and we really have things in place. So other than that, I feel like it was a great experience. We learned a lot, and we're utilizing a lot of the things that the FCLB has put in place for us to help with our educational aspects when we have enforcement and disciplinary issues that are really helpful in rehabilitation aspects. So, and Dr. Pierce, or anything you want to add, feel free, but it was a good experience.
Yeah, thank you. I would concur with all of that, and especially the importance of us being able to get out and interact with other licensing board members and discuss all those important disciplinary, regulatory issues, board operations, and bring that back and help us get better. The other thing I would add is, I think to your point about how this board runs, I think it was a nice reminder for me to reflect on, we're in this really nice place where we're always looking for quality improvement, and we're always looking to do from wherever we're sitting on a certain position or an issue or regulation, we're always looking to take that next step. And so we're kind of always looking at, like, how is this thing made a little bit better? How can we make this one extra piece a little bit better? And when you're doing that, it's a good place to be, but it's nice to be able to look back and recognize that you're still in a really efficient and effective mode, and things are relatively, in general, overall, they're going really well, and so that was a good reminder to hear from other boards and to kind of be able to put ourselves in a place of, where are all the other boards at with those issues. And, I would open it up to the rest of the board members for comments, discussion, questions.
I don't have anything to add. I appreciate you guys going out there and representing California well, it sounds like, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I know that I saw kind of some of the materials, even social media was a topic.
Yes.
Wasn't sure if that was kind of anywhere in our agenda, but if there was anything there that kind of you heard or
Well, there was a discussion, and you can see from the questions in the agenda that were offered there, you know, social media is, you know, comes up. A lot of us are experiencing our practices as well. People come in, they've seen stuff on social media. And there was discussion about what role the boards can play in that, you know, from a regulatory standpoint, from a discipline standpoint, from a enforcement standpoint, all these different aspects, because you have issues of free speech and expression, and people have different points of view. And then, you know, from my perspective, about disclosure, about also what is best for the profession. So, you know, I think it's something that we need to spend time on, and I think Chairman Paris agrees that, you know, that's something that needs to be discussed and addressed from our perspective, either from a state standpoint or a national standpoint. Because, you know, people in other states go on social media, and then people in our state, where we only have the control, but they're from out of state, how do you regulate that? How do you deal with that? Is a broader picture, you know, and also, we see things on there where, you know, is there entertainment, you know, but when it comes to the profession, are disclosures needing to be done that say, well, this is entertainment, or this is actual, or this is dramatization, just like a lot of things do now. So I think it's coming fast, and we should, you know, get to a point where we're addressing that.
Yeah, and I think obviously these discussions will, you know, maybe new business, we'll put it on an agenda for a committee and have those discussions with our stakeholders and kind of get that feedback, like how does everybody, you know, involved here feel about this? And I think what's really interesting for me in that discussion, and one of the values of being at FCLB, is it really emphasized how social media has changed. It's changed the whole kind of the game. And it used to be maybe it was a newspaper advertisement, or you know, a local maybe even a TV advertisement or something that was very local to an area, you know, and even in the broadest terms, maybe it spanned a section of a state or a full state. But now you can you can cover the whole United States, and something can go viral and really have millions, literally hundreds of thousands to millions of people looking at it within, you know, hours, you know, in some cases. And so I think that'll be a really interesting discussion. I hope all our stakeholders join us in, you know, discussing that and figuring out if there is something that, you know, needs to be done or should be done or can be done there. And yeah. Anything else from the board members? Hearing none. I would open this up to agenda item 4, the FCLB meeting update for public comment. Hearing no public comment, I will move to agenda item number 5. And I want to welcome Assistant Deputy Director from the Department of Consumer Affairs, Yvonne Durantes, and ask her to provide us with an update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. Welcome, Deputy Director.
Is there a mic? Oh, great. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you in person. I think this is my first in-person Chiro meeting, so it's nice to see some of your faces. I think some of you I've assisted during your onboarding process, so it's nice to put some faces to names. If you received the DCA member relations email, I'm usually the one behind those, so this is a face to that email as well. Thank you for having me here this morning. Although you guys did beat me to a couple of the updates, I do have quite a bit of updates for you. Happy to take any questions during or after as well. So beginning with our DEI update, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion update. On September 29th, the DEI Steering Committee did hold its quarterly meeting. The committee discussed employee engagement, cultural events, and observances, as well as membership composition, DEI training, DEI hiring principles, and the development of a DEI webpage for employees. The committee plans to roll out a DEI hiring principles and launch the internal DEI webpage by the end of the year. The DEI Steering Committee is also pleased to announce that an outside consultant, Dr. Bernard Gibson, provided an in-person DEI training to over 150 DCA managers, supervisors, and leaders on October 4th. In addition, Dr. Gibson provided virtual training to board members on October 9th. For those that attended the training, please be sure to take the survey emailed after the training, and your opinions will be vital to determining future training needs and opportunities. If you did miss it, it will be available via a recording. So, or if you want to rewatch it again, if you did participate, it's got a lot of great things. Dr. Gibson has over 20 years of corporate experience managing teams and training employees in business effectiveness. Dr. Gibson also has extensive teaching experience at various colleges, including serving as an adjunct faculty member since 2006 at University of Massachusetts for the School of Business and Professional Studies. On November 7th, 2023, UMass consultant Christopher Veal will provide a training entitled DEI Dialogue for Leaders to DCA managers, supervisors, and leaders. Veal's trainings will include example language and tools, discuss psychological safety and how it impacts these conversations, and include interactive discussion around challenges leaders are facing. DCA encourages all executive officers and their management teams to attend. And finally, the DEI Steering Committee is pleased to highlight work of the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, which is collaborating with the Los Angeles County Probation Department to launch the first youth and county level barbering program. The board hopes to have it operational by late winter. And the board has also been collaborating with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to relaunch its testing program within state correctional facilities, expanding to include barbering, and it's anticipated that it will be a large program with 4 facilities committing to include barbering schools. If any of you have any questions in regard to DEI discussions, opportunities, training, anything, please feel free to reach out to me. Moving on to press release translations. So in order to further the department's efforts to reach the Californians we serve, DCA will request boards and bureaus to translate press releases into Spanish, California's top non-English language, and establish a standard for translating releases into both English and Spanish. And so we encourage your boards to also evaluate the needs of your audience, your licensees, to please determine what might be some other languages that might be needed within your arena. And if you do have any questions in regard to this new standard, please reach out to our Public Affairs Office. Moving on to in-person meetings and Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Acts, we do have a couple updates on that matter. On September 13th, Senate Bill 143 was signed by Governor Newsom, and it became effective immediately. Included in this bill was language related to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which allows for remote public meetings without noticed locations, accessible to the public until December 31st of this year. Senate Bill 544, a bill also pertaining to the Open Meeting Act, was also signed by the governor, and commencing on January 1st of 2024, 4 meeting options will be available under Bagley-Keene, and that includes number 1, traditional single location option, in which the majority of members gathered at one publicly noticed and accessible location. No members are participating remotely, and no requirement to allow remote public participation. Option number 2, which is the traditional teleconference option, includes members at different publicly noticed and accessible locations connected via phone or WebEx, and no requirement to allow remote public participation. Number 3, which is the new teleconference option, is the majority of members gathered at one publicly noticed and accessible location. Extra members above a majority can participate remotely from a private non-public site and must allow remote public participation. And number 4, the new advisory body teleconference option. All members can participate remotely from private, non-public sites, must have at least one publicly noticed and accessible location where at least one staff member is present and where the public can participate in the meeting, and also must allow for remote public access as well. And so these 4 options that will be effective January 1st were emailed out from our board and bureau relations monthly email. It was sent out to your board chair, and so your EO also received it. So if you do have any questions or want to have that list at hand, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Moving on to required board member trainings reminders. As we do approach the final months of the year, there are 2 DCA-wide mandatory trainings that if you haven't already completed them, we ask that you do so immediately. And this is sexual harassment prevention training and informational security awareness. And so all DCA employees and appointees, including board members, will need to complete sexual harassment prevention training. And if you do have a DCA assigned email, you do also need to complete the informational security awareness. And so just to clarify, if you do not have an @dca.ca.gov email assigned, you do not have to complete the information security awareness. However, you do have to complete the 2-hour supervisory sexual harassment prevention training. It is approximately 2 hours, but it is only due every odd numbered year. So it's due every 2 years.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Should we have one of those emails?
You can. It's up to you. It's up to, kind of your workload management, if you prefer to have your professional, DCA email. But if you do want to pursue it, feel free to reach out and we can make that happen. Yeah, it's not mandatory, but it's up to you. Mm-hmm. And so both of these trainings can be found on our learning management system. If you forgot your ID, if you forgot your password, you can reach out to me or at DCA Member Relations. I'm happy to reset your password or look up what your user ID is. If you're unsure, if you already took this training, can't remember, you can also reach out to me or Kristen. We have your training records, but please be advised that they are due December 31st of this year. And so in order for you to be in compliance, you will need to complete those trainings. And we did just have our final board member orientation training of the year. It is required for newly appointed and reappointed members. And once the dates for the 2024 trainings have been finalized, we will be notifying you and your executive officer. And you'll be able to register via LMS if you've been appointed or reappointed within the last year and have not completed it. I think Mr. Adams already touched on the out-of-state travel update, but I'll kind of go over it as well. And this was also included in our monthly email. But on September 13th, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 447, which was authored by a Senate Pro Tem President Atkins, which ends California's restrictions on taxpayer-funded travel by state agencies and departments to states that have adopted discriminatory anti-LGBTQ plus laws. And so SB 447 eliminated California's restricted states travel list and created a new public awareness project that will consult with community leaders to promote California's values and acceptance and inclusion of the LGBTQ plus community across the country. And so in the past years, several out-of-state trips requested by the boards were not authorized because the travel was to state on one of the restricted travel lists. This will lift that restriction and permit out-of-state travel to all states if the trip is critical to the functions and needs of the boards. And again, if you have any questions in regard to this, please feel free to reach out. Moving on to Our Promise campaign launch, which is the State Employees Giving at Work campaign. And so this year's Our Promise campaign is co-chaired by Monica Vargas, who is the DCA's Deputy Director of Communications, and also co-chaired by me. And so this annual campaign gives state employees, including board members, an opportunity to support nonprofits through a one-time donation or payroll deduction. These contributions make a positive impact by providing vital resources to those experiencing poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, and also offer support to those causes such as veterans, animals, the environment, and much more. We hope you will join the state's campaign and contribute to a nonprofit or nonprofits of your choice. With your assistance, DCA will continue this tradition. And so you can start off a donation as little as $5 or whatever you feel comfortable with. And I think there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different nonprofits to choose from. And me and Deputy Director Monica Vargas are also working on putting together a nonprofit fair. So if you do happen to be in Sacramento and want to come out and see if there's a nonprofit that you might be interested in donating to, please feel free to come out. And so we'll be communicating additional information and details on that fair. Last update, BCSH, our Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, recently announced that she has been appointed to serve as the Chief of Housing and Homelessness in the office of the LA Mayor Karen Bass. This is effective November 4th. And so Secretary Castro Ramirez has been a great partner to DCA. And so we are sad to see her go, but very excited for her in this new endeavor. And so grateful to her leadership. And so that's all the updates I have for you. Are there any other questions? Thanks for bearing with me through all those updates. Again, if you want me to go over anything that I covered already, please feel free to reach out to us. And most of the information was also included in our monthly email and also our newsletter that recently went out as well and will be posted to our board members resource page online as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ontis. Let me open it to, are there any questions or discussion by the board on the Department of Consumer Affairs update? Hearing none, I would open agenda item number 5, the Department of Consumer Affairs update, to any public comment.
I was saying, as part of the ASB here, we're doing a workshop, which I think is great. That it's starting on the system.
Okay.
Oh, you wanna
Come on up.
Come on up.
Yeah, please, thank you. Appreciate the comment.
Right.
All right, hello board. I'm Tim, I'm a student here. I'm part of the ASB, and I was just saying, talking on that subject, we're doing a DEI workshop in the coming months at the school here, so I just wanted to, I guess, make that comment. So it's good that it aligns with what's going on at the board. Yeah.
Is it a workshop just specifically for students? Are you seeing it for staff as well, or?
Everyone's invited to it, and then I think we have opened it up to people getting service hours to, I mean, in order to get participants, it's a nicer way to do it, so hopefully more people show up, which is great. I think it was like supported by the school as a whole, which is good. Yes.
Well, my comment there is I think that's wonderful, especially kind of as kind of you go through the progress of kind of finishing school, finishing kind of all the studies, but then going kind of out into your own practices and knowing kind of the incredibly diverse population that everyone's going to serve in California, if you stay in California. But yes,
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
For sure. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Tim.
thank you for that information. Appreciate that. Any further public comment on agenda item number 5, Department of Consumer Affairs update? Hearing none. Moving to agenda item number 6, our review and possible approval of the July 20th, 2023 board meeting minutes. We are going to table this item for the January 2024 meeting. The minutes were not ready in advance of this meeting 10 days in advance to get them out to the public in time, so we'll table that and get them out for everybody to read. I would open agenda item number 6 to public comment, if there's any public comment on tabling that item, or seeing none. Move to agenda item number 7, review and possible ratification of approved Doctor of Chiropractic license applications. I would open it up for initial discussion or questions by the board.
I motion that we approve the pending applications for licensees.
Thank you.
I will second that motion.
And I would open this up for any public comment on the motion. Seeing none, is there any further discussion by the board? Hearing none, Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Yes, Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams.
Yes.
Mr. Sweet is yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
and Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Moving to agenda item number 8, review and possible ratification of approved continuing education provider applications. I would open it up, initial discussion by any of the board. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the continuing education provider applications.
A
Thank
second?
you. Seconded. I would open agenda item number 8 up for public comment. Is there any public comment on the review and ratification of approved continuing education provider applications? Seeing none. Is there any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Dr. Paris,
Yes.
Dr. Adams.
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
and Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Moving to agenda item number 9, our executive officer's report and update, and I will turn it over to Ms. Walker to provide the report.
Sure, thank you. So as you can tell from the meeting agenda, there's actually quite a bit of content for me to cover today under the executive officer's report. I'm going to start first with a personnel update. So our former enforcement manager, William Walker, left the board effective October 6th. He actually found a promotional position over at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, where he's going to be working on some policy issues. So wishing William all the best. Recruitment efforts are really underway at this point to refill that vacancy in our enforcement manager position. We've gone through the duty statement for the position. We've updated it really to reflect a lot of the board's goals in the strategic plan around staff development and just increasing the number of staff we have available to support all of our policy work and our regulations that we're proposing. So we're pretty excited about that. We're anticipating that we'll likely be advertising that position. We're looking at probably early November and hoping to have somebody in place in the holiday season that we can introduce to you all at the January meeting. We've also, on the topic of recruitment, we also have 2 advertisements that are currently open. I believe one may have closed yesterday and then another one closing today for an enforcement analyst position and a special investigator position so that we can increase our enforcement staff. And then our plan is to follow that up in November with 2 additional recruitments for 2 more enforcement analyst positions. One likely designated as the lead position that can take that role in our enforcement unit, and then another one that would be specifically geared towards conducting desk investigations. We've been doing a lot with the enforcement unit in terms of training and working on increasing the specialization of the staff within the unit, so that we can more effectively address the gap that we have between the staff that was performing more of a process type of investigation and our special investigators. We're kind of filling that gap with enforcement analysts who are going to be conducting true desk investigations and conducting interviews. So a lot of exciting things to come with our enforcement program and kind of some of those new processes that we have in place. We're also doing a lot of work around with the Office of Information Services on being able to get better reporting of our enforcement data that's coming through so that we can better measure what the outcome is going to be of this restructuring of the enforcement unit. We really are interested in being able to gather some better information around trends in the complaints that we're receiving, and then also the outcomes of our investigations and the timeframes associated with each phase. Because currently, right now, we have data that tells us how long it takes from start to finish, but we're trying to get better data around our active investigation timeframes versus case aging that's associated with case management activities that are largely outside of our control, such as the gap in time between when you are notified of an arrest and when the conviction actually occurs. You get documents in hand and proceed with disciplinary action. So we really, and that's also in support of one of our strategic plan objectives, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But a lot of the effort right now at the staff level is working on training our enforcement unit. We're also working on a lot of training for our licensing unit. The licensing unit has been doing a really great job of processing the applications that they have. We have good cycle times, but we're always looking to make them better. So we've made a few adjustments to our initial licensure process to make it more effective to get licenses in hands faster by being able to issue them a lot sooner and then less in batches, and then the printed license will arrive later, but at least we can get them up on DCA search and we can get people ready to practice. So just a lot of exciting things that we're doing internally with the staff that I wanted to highlight as part of my update today. Also wanted to highlight, it kind of goes hand in hand with our Connect project that we've been working on. I know I've been giving updates probably, it's been about the last 2 years of different phases of this project. We hit a bit of a hurdle this summer when it came to upgrading to the newest version of the Connect software. We had initially anticipated a summer rollout, then it became late summer. We're now heading into fall and we don't quite have that yet. The Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Services is aware of the issue and we're working through it. We recently had the project manager on that project had departed. We've now got some new leadership on the project and kind of an increased or refreshed role in making sure that we can get our upgrade in place, and then also address some of the user experience issues that are continuing to affect that project, particularly the license renewal process. So I've got some increased focus on that, and we are anticipating that we're going to wrap that up by the end of this calendar year. And that's really been our impediment on being able to just widely push it to licensees and get them to really request that they use the system. It's just some of the challenges once you get in there, if it's throwing unknown error messages, and then it's kind of tedious for us to fix it. So we've got some solutions in place. We're also one of my requests is that we can get a workaround in place to where if someone does encounter issues in the system, a simple phone call to board staff, we could take a credit card payment by phone and they can renew their license so that it's not their problem. We'll still, work out whatever the issue is in the background, but being able to provide a little bit better customer service when they are using that system. The other portion of the Connect project that we're putting quite a bit of resources in right now is to develop the entire continuing education module. We had thought about a few different ways to approach it and how we were going to implement it. And then we had settled on developing an internal tool first that on the back end of the project, or on the back end of the system, as we receive continuing education provider and course applications, staff can put those into the system, have it assign an application number, be able to work through our workflow electronically, whereas we're currently very paper-based. And then from there, bring the providers online and allow them to be able to provide the direct submission to staff, and we can process it using the back end of the system. We also are really interested in developing a public-facing tool that, that licensees and the public can use to locate continuing education courses. We want to replace that current Excel list that goes hundreds of pages long for each month. It's not a very effective tool for being able to locate continuing education courses. So we want to be able to build a tool to where licensees can go in and search by subject area, their location, just general interest. They could search by provider and just actually have them have a tool that they can use to help locate the courses that they want to take. And it'll also be very beneficial for our enforcement staff because many times when we're taking enforcement actions or negotiating on disciplinary cases, we also need to locate courses that are very specific to a case. And that's a challenge that we currently have as well, is trying to locate a course that's going to be effective for a specific issue we identified through an enforcement case. So a lot of exciting things going on with the Connect project. We are expecting to see quite a bit of movement here between now and the next board meeting. Particularly where we're going to see the most changes, I would say, is around the user experience. And then as we get into the spring, start seeing the continuing education functionality. I'm going to pause there because I do have quite a few updates to cover, but is there any questions from the board on either the personnel or the Connect project?
Yeah, so I recently used it to relicense. Is the functionality to upload your CE, is that available yet, or is that kind of what part of the problem is?
So that's a good question. So initially when it was placed, when the license renewal process went online, it used to require licensees to upload their CE at the time of renewal. That was causing an issue, and we weren't seeing a lot of adoption of the system because of that issue, because with the paper process, you just certify that you've done it, you submit it. So what we did was we removed that upload portion from the renewal application itself, and we placed it on the dashboard so it can be used as a tool. So licensees can currently upload their certificates and store them in the system, but it's not required at renewal.
So it's there?
It's there,
now.
yes.
Okay. And is it on the dashboard, like right below where it says renew?
I believe there's a tab at the top. I believe it says continuing education, and there's an entire tab for
Okay.
it.
And is that happened in the last couple months, or?
I believe it was last spring. Yeah, or it was around the February release. It's been up there for a little bit.
It's been there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some people are using it.
Yeah, I went to or had my staff do it, and they couldn't find it, so I'll have to look at it again, just as far as making sure licensees see it. Okay, and then the other question, if they're having a problem with the Connect, you said they could call, take the credit card. Is there going to be like a direct number? Because kind of when you call now, it's, you know, you're sort of looped through. You have to, you know who you're calling. Is the number that they call, is that going to be like efficient? So the licensee's sitting there trying to renew, and there's a problem. Will it go directly to one particular person versus having to go through the list?
That's another great question. So one improvement that we made over the last calendar year was we created specific unit email addresses for each of our units. So no longer just the Chiro info, but enforcement, CE, licensing. They all have their own shared boxes. And we also have, with our phone tree system, there's direct lines that get you to that unit. So the goal there would be to publish the licensing line so that you can skip a couple steps and get right to the person that can assist you.
Okay, perfect.
And that, as far as with the website, we want to get that, kind of eliminate the main line wherever we can.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then my last question was, are you seeing current trends with enforcement issues now? I know you mentioned implementing things to be able to capture that, but just currently, are we seeing trends with enforcement issues?
We're seeing, with many of the cases that we're seeing, and I'll get into it a little bit as I get into statistics, but just generally, we're seeing, as far as the complaints that we're receiving, we're seeing a lot of just what I would generally just call just general unprofessional conduct or lack of communication, just a lot of things that don't fit neatly into our categories of violations, but it's still just something's not right. So we're conducting investigations on that side. We've also, at the moment, we're issuing a lot of citations and letters of admonishment as we work through cases that they're not quite as severe to require discipline. But one common theme that I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of excessive treatment or a lot of and a lot of documentation issues, a lot of record keeping. And that's one of our pending regulations that we're working through with the enforcement committee is around record keeping and what that entails. But we're seeing quite a bit of expert reports of not meeting the standard of care with record keeping that we're hoping to fix through that reg.
And then can we, in the future, are we planning on taking those trends and themes of enforcement issues and then getting them to the licensees through, kind of we talked about through our website, helping to educate our licensees before these issues come up? You know, we talked about, you know, fact of the day and just different things of educating our licensees so these mistakes don't happen.
Yes. Our goal around the outreach on it is to be able to, just like you said, be able to, be able to post and kind of comment on things that we're seeing in real time with enforcement as it comes up, and also just moving beyond. We have a lot of we'll have publications, but being able to break, we have a top 10 violations, but breaking that down to be something that we can do beyond just a flyer. We are working on that.
And then, like, maybe having the discussion, like reaching out to ACA, CCA, the schools, so that they can, contribute to disseminating the information as far as teaching people what kind of the mistakes are.
Of course.
That was all I had.
Mine is around the Connect system. You mentioned that a lot of the updates we're hoping to get into year end before we go into the more kind of the spring updates. For the year-end rollout for, I think it was more around the billing side of things, or the unknown error issues. Is there any, and I know we've talked about this before, but what does the communication to licensees look like? Like, would we feel like we were in a place come beginning 2024 where we can really start pushing this? Because I know we've been hesitant to push it until we have issues, or I just want to know, what does communication look like? Because I know it's been a long time coming, there's been delays along the way, but what does it look like in terms of our level of comfort to communicate, so we can push the usage kind of as we're pretty much landing in the second half of the fiscal year?
I'd probably identify one major issue that needs to be addressed before we feel comfortable. Actually, there's two, but as far as on the system side, the issue that needs to be addressed has to do with the dashboard and the way it interprets a license renewal period. It ends up resulting in multiple lines that's very confusing to the user. We want to align it a lot closer to what the user sees if they were to look up their own individual profile on the DCA search system, where it just very simply tells them when their license was issued, when it's going to expire, the current status, with a button for them to renew it. And then if it's already been renewed, if it just gives them a message that's very clear, you're set till 2024. So that's what we expect to see in effect by year end, to where we can make that change happen. Another issue the other side of the issue that we've been encountering has to do with the fact of our outdated forms that we have in regulation. They've all been incorporated by reference. They've been stuck in a regulation for 20 plus years. We need to kind of pivot to where we can more effectively just, instead of incorporating them by reference, specify in the regulation what the form needs to entail, so that we have a little bit more flexibility when we need to just update forms with, additional things over time. So that's another thing that we're exploring with our regulatory councils, how to fix that. As far as the communication that we want to get out to licensees is, once we feel comfortable with the system, we want that renewal packet to go out to include a flyer that's renew online, make it bright color, make it very obvious, save your time, save the expense of a stamp, just go online, take care of it. If there's any issues, here's our direct line and an email address for some assistance. But that's kind of the rollout, is to get it in that form, because what we're finding is a lot of people are just using that renewal. And that's kind of phase one. As the system, as we kind of increase the utilization of the system, we feel more confident with it. We could always explore routes like other boards have had, where some of them mandate online renewal. So you can do things like, instead of printing that expensive package, just print a notice that it's time to renew, and it's like, they can always go on the website and print it if they still want to mail, things like that. So there's a couple strategies, but our start is get it simpler once you log in to use it, and then put a flyer, and then from there kind of start peeling back some of the paper.
Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion from the board? And I think you were in the middle of You stopped to get questions in the middle, so I'd
I've got a lot of
let you,
updates.
yeah,
So,
no, please
we're-
continue. Please continue.
So,
We'll
okay.
we'll do public comment at the end of your full
Yeah,
report.
and then, we've also, I'm sure we're gonna end up hitting the great shakeout right in the middle, so I'll probably hit one more topic and then we'll take a brief break.
Ten,
and-
let's, yeah, somewhere like 10:05 or something,
Okay,
that'd be good.
yeah, that
Okay.
sounds good. I think to have an update that's not gonna take too much time and give us a good, ease. Another item that we're really working on, with staff, and it's pretty exciting, is, now that we have our updated fees, we've been able to, and we also have a little bit of cost savings from, just the, personnel savings that we have with some of our vacancies. We're investing in upgraded equipment for staff, which is pretty exciting, because we haven't purchased new computers or monitors for staff in over 10 years. So we're getting them, the equipment that they need, but we're also doing, quite a focus on trying to, I call it paper light, because I just don't think in government you're ever paperless. But we're really trying to look at how we can integrate, less paper into our processes, and then also just hopefully achieve some long-term savings in that route. Looking at some of the equipment that we have in the office, we have a very expensive copier that's kind of nearing its age, but we're trying to find strategies to where, rather than replacing it, just let's do less with paper, let's purchase more scanners, let's get by with some smaller equipment that still will get the job done. So we're looking at a lot of those strategies. It's been pretty exciting for staff, because we're kind of envisioning, it's like, well, how can we do each of these steps but not generate paper? So we're really testing that with enforcement cases, because we've got, we're kind of the last with the paper, because we've now gotten to the point where we accept online complaints. When we transmit things to the Division of Investigation, it's done electronically. When we send cases to the Attorney General's office, it's done electronically. Everything through OAH is done electronically, so we're kind of the last of the paper. As far as with 2024, we want to roll out electronic expert reports. So instead of transmitting and mailing paper and getting hard copy paper back from our experts, we want to start transmitting cases electronically and just requesting that they complete an electronic report. That not only will save time and money, but it also allows us to have increased control over the documents themselves as we share those electronic links. So that's another exciting thing that we've got that we're rolling out in 2024. And then also on the topic of experts, we actually are getting very, very close to being able to advertise for recruiting new experts. That's been kind of one of those projects that we've had that languished for a little bit there, but we've really got an increased need to supplement our expert program with some new experts, have them vetted through the enforcement committee. So our plan is to, by the end of the month, open up an advertisement for us to begin accepting applications for new experts. And then after they go through just a staff screening process to ensure they're eligible, that they meet the number of years of licensure requirements, that they don't have any history of enforcement action, then our plan is to work with enforcement committee members to carve out a little bit of time to be able to do the interviews that we had discussed as being the final phase of that project, so we can get some new experts into our pool, and then plan for having a meeting with our assigned DAG liaison from the Attorney General's office to be able to conduct a training for our experts in the spring. There's a couple kind of opportunities, I would say, for improvement with some of our experts and the reports. So we're looking at really being able to use this process of recruiting and then the training and updated materials to be able to, continue to make our program effective, but even more effective. Any questions on that, on the expert recruitment?
I have a question and a comment. Number one, transitioning to fillable, signable PDFs for our enforcement, vote orders, everything was a huge, massive time saver. And so, yes on less paper. So do we have a sense of kind of, as we recruit for experts, is there a number of broad areas where we might identify like subject matter experts, depending on, what the enforcement case entails?
What we need to expand on, and what we're gonna gain from the application process, is just a better understanding of the expert themselves, their background, the types of techniques that they perform, kind of, we know their areas of practice and areas of specialization, so that we know that we're really matching the most effective expert to a case that we're dealing with. You know, you don't want to be in a position where you mismatch experts, where you've got a case that concerns a very specific technique, but your expert isn't all that familiar with it, and then the defense brings in an expert in a specific area. So that's where we want to have a little bit more information beyond a list, and then just kind of staff experience of knowing whether they produce good quality reports or not. We want to really be able to make sure that they've been vetted through the board members, and that, you know, that they're kind of up to snuff when it comes to, you know, being able to be successful at hearings.
My suggestion would be that as we move forward, we identify like maybe certain areas that might be a focus, even if they're just kind of general broad areas. I know a lot of our experts might have advanced certifications in like billing and coding, and some are kind of held up as subject matter experts in, you know, even like boundary violations or areas like that. So that would be my suggestion, that we maybe identify those a little more succinctly so we can target it a little bit better.
Yeah, and another challenge that we see with the expert reports, we try to address it as we see it, is just when it comes to where the level is. Because with many of the experts, they truly are experts. So we have to watch that their report is producing whether or not something meets the standard of care, or whether minimum expectations may not be the best way to do something, but is it truly a violation or not? Did it fall below the minimum expected standard of care? That's kind of sometimes where we can see issues, particularly when it comes to things like when it's very specific, like billing and coding. If you're an expert in billing and coding, are you at a higher standard than what the rest of the profession would do in similar circumstances? So we're kind of working around that. We also want to do a little bit more with our experts around our sexual misconduct cases, because sometimes they get those cases and they seem maybe unsure of kind of where to proceed with that, or they feel the need to comment on the credibility of one or other party, or kind of weigh in on what they believe, versus just the reason we transmit those cases as staff to experts is because we don't understand what's in the chiropractic record. We need you to tell us what those records say occurred, and that's it. That's all we need, and then we it's different from the role of a judge. So we want to do a lot more targeted training around that issue, particularly on the sexual misconduct. We've done a lot of training with staff. We've changed the way we handle a lot of those cases, where a lot of them now go to the Division of Investigation, but that's kind of the last remaining piece that we need, is a little bit better training on experts when it comes to those cases.
I have a question on that. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just saying thank you.
When we were at the FCLB, a lot of the boards in the other states, their board members are their experts. They're the ones that are being asked to weigh in, and I wonder sometimes if that would save time, or is that an option for you, that when you have some of that, is it the reason because we have to have that distance, because we're gonna have to weigh in on a case, we can't be a party to it? Is that why, okay. It just seems like other boards, they can do that. That's part of their role.
And that's that Wild West you were referring to, because I remember when I went to FCLB the year before, I remember with the small boards that we're talking about, they'd get a complaint, assign it to the board member, and the board member goes out and actually investigates the complaint and reports back to everybody what they found.
Right.
They recuse themselves, but then everybody else makes the decision. It's just it's not something that we have. It's I understand, because it'd be great if we could leverage our own board members, but we can't. And that's even what creates sometimes that distance between kind of my role is bringing the cases with an accusation because we have findings that something occurred, but then your role as the ultimate decision maker on whether or not discipline will occur. So it's just different structure, but I think ours is more effective.
Yeah.
I think too, it speaks to our resources that we don't, they may have the need to do that in a small town where the sheriff has to be the fire chief and has to be the judge, but, Thank you. More?
I got more, but now
Yeah.
it's 10:04.
Oh,
so I don't know
okay.
if you want to take your
Yeah, I think we should.
take a break.
Okay. So we'll take a 15, is that enough?
We
or-
should shake out.
Okay, let's do a 20, so we'll come back at, let's take a break until 10:25, and we'll continue on then with agenda item number 9, the rest of the executive officer's report and updates. Everybody good? Good? Yes, thank you. Okay, welcome back. We will continue on with agenda item number 9, the executive officer's report and updates.
Sure, thank you. I think I'm going to continue with covering some statistics that we have for our programs. So there was a handout of just kind of capturing our current workload as it exists. Some of it as of yesterday, and then for our continuing education, it's through September. Really, our licensing unit want to continue to acknowledge all their hard work. They're doing an excellent job of processing their applications, eliminating any backlogs. We don't have any, and really just putting all the focus on ensuring that people can maintain and continue licensure. We're right around where we expect to be, particularly looking at the number of DC licenses that have been renewed. Looking at just a little bit of over a quarter of the fiscal year through. And we're at about 3,900 people have renewed their license. So right around where we expect to be. We talk about this at every meeting, just a very slight decline in the number of licensees that we have from year to year. Still kind of seeing that trend this year. Don't expect an increase. We're kind of expecting just that steady decrease over time. But at least we're not seeing a dramatic decrease. It's steady. We're also continuing to see and receive a high volume of satellite certificate applications. A lot of that we suspect is due to licensees recovering from the COVID pandemic and really increasing their availability and the different locations from which they're practicing. That's a trend that we've seen now for the last 2 years, and we're likely expecting to continue into this year. And then later on today's agenda, we'll talk a little bit about some work that the licensing committee is doing, particularly around satellite certificates, and trying to find a solution that may be more effective for us to track the different locations from which licensees are practicing. But for now, we're continuing with the satellite certificates, continuing to receive a high volume. Corporation certificates, right around where we have been on those. One kind of goal for 2024 is to find a more effective way to reach licensees that have the corporations and ensure that they're getting their certificates of registration from the board and that they're renewing them timely. Gonna try to explore to see what possibilities there are out there for us to be notified potentially when somebody incorporates a chiropractic corporation, knowing the fact that they're going to have to get a certificate of registration from the board, because we don't have any good data sharing at the moment between us and the Secretary of State's office to get that information. So that's kind of a more long-term goal, but we'd like to explore that. I bring that up because even some of the recent enforcement cases we've been reviewing, they're initiated looking at practice issues, but then we're identifying cases where there are corporations out there that aren't registered with the board. So just another thing to explore as we get into a new year. Continue. Go ahead.
Just one comment too that I want to bring. Something I just recently became aware of that I think it's something to think about, whether it's the licensing aspect in committee, is part of and I don't know how much of this is related to the increase in satellite, but I know that there's been a lot of push in the workers' comp arena relative to the qualified medical examiners, that there's a lot of individuals to expand their footprint and getting on panels is doing a lot of satellite offices that they're covering in a geographical area. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's something that you're seeing along with that as well. We've been approached several times about having our office be a satellite for that very thing. So it's something to be aware of, which I've got some opinions about that trend, but anyway, that's just something to.
And thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that we've observed as well, especially sometimes from third-party companies that are pushing and trying to submit those applications on other licensees' behalf, and kind of really pushing the staff that they want it processed immediately so they can get almost into a network of having multiple locations for those examinations. I think definitely something that'd be a good new business topic that we could kind of examine at a future meeting, but it is something that we've noticed. We've had, actually, Ms. Pitto even had some conversations with some of those networks that are kind of generating that demand for having multiple. So I think good discussion topic for a future
Yes,
meeting.
yes.
Thank you. We've also got some statistics there around our continuing education applications. We're really heading into the busiest portion of the year for our continuing education program, and I say that fully recognizing that our continuing education program actually hasn't slowed down in all of 2023. So we received a high volume of applications last fall ahead of the fee increase that went into effect, and then that volume pretty much carried us throughout calendar year 2023. And now we're beginning to receive additional applications as we get into 2024. You can see from, within just the first quarter of the year, a little over 350 applications have been received. Staff has processed 236 of those applications and approved over 1,300 hours of education. Of those applications, of note, just only 2 hours of CE were denied, and the majority of those applications were approved. Now keep in mind that denied means outright denied. We do identify deficiencies in applications from the point of receipt to making a decision to provide an approval, but denied is something that when the course just doesn't meet the board's regulations, and there's not really a solution that we have to offer other than we can't approve that course. So I just wanted to note that. When it comes to the continuing education, as we get that program online into Connect, that's another area where we can get some better data around what those deficiencies are and communicate them to providers. We don't currently have a very effective method of tracking that just due to the heavily paper-based process we have right now for continuing education. And then our enforcement program is really where, like I had mentioned earlier today, where we're putting the majority of our resources and effort, and the reason being just the sustained high volume of cases that we're seeing in our enforcement program. In the first quarter here of the year, we've already have over 170 complaints we've received. We're slowly catching up on being able to kind of address the backlog that we have in cases, closed just a little under 150 of those cases. Our pending complaint number as of yesterday is 535. It's a very high number. We're really working aggressively with our staff, and in the absence of the enforcement manager position, Tammy and I have split supervising the staff. We're providing some pretty hands-on assistance to staff in reviewing their cases, discussing some of the issues, and making plans so that we can move a lot of those cases forward. We are anticipating that number to be likely in the 400s as we approach the end of the year, and trying to ideally get us back down into the 300s by the end of the fiscal year. We do have, with those cases, we're at a point where we've received a lot of cases. We have a lot of investigations complete. They're going through expert review processes, so we do anticipate closing a high number of those this fiscal year. And then we're also coming out of a period, if you recall, within, it was about 2 years ago, where we had a high volume of cases that were referred to the Attorney General's office, and it resulted in high AG costs and high pending workload. We've really worked through the majority of what those cases were, and we're now at a point where, looking at this next fiscal year, we're still taking action when violations are found, but we're not anticipating quite a high volume of Attorney General's referrals. What we're actually anticipating for this fiscal year is more use of our other resources that we have available, such as issuing citations and letters of admonishment for more minor violations. So we are expecting pretty high increase in the number of citations and fines, a decrease in the number of AG cases that we're going to have. We're still pending around that 62 number. I'm really anticipating us to be in the 40s or 50s as we start heading into the new year. Just because, like I said, our number of referrals is decreasing compared to the number of cases that we're currently adjudicating. Haven't had any license applications denied in the last year. We do have one pending case before the board. I believe it's scheduled for hearing this spring. So you'll have a proposed decision to consider on that. But we generally don't have a high volume of license applications denied. We do have one pending case, which is unique compared to prior fiscal years. We're also, when you look at cost recovery, that's ordered and collected, that's been an ongoing issue, not only for our board, but really it's all the DCA programs struggle with the same issue. It's primarily driven when you look at the amount of cost recovery that's ordered versus collected. When it's ordered, when we have cases where someone's surrendered a license and it's not due until they want to come back and get their license back, it still reflects there as being ordered, yet it's not technically collectible. There's nothing we can do to get that money right away. Something for us to consider when we're looking at disciplinary guidelines, if there's something we can do to make that money or portion of that money due closer to when an order goes into effect, that would be helpful, because a lot of our resources for our board, we're a small board, but so much of our resources go to enforcement, and we want to be able to more effectively recover our costs when we do have violations, so that the burden isn't carried through the DC license renewal fee as a whole. So a couple things there with enforcement. Happy to answer any questions if the board has any on just our overall workload and statistics.
Just got a quick question on the, obviously there's, a high number of pending complaints, as you mentioned. Do we know what, like, the age of some of those complaints are? Is there an average age, or how long is it taking to get those processed on average?
It generally varies. We're working on some better data to get that out, but right now we're trending at about a year to 18 months on a lot of our cases. The ones that are simple, non-jurisdictional, are closed within days. Then we've got, when we look at our attorney general's cases, those are taking 2 to 3 years. We're really working towards getting our goal of our overall goal for investigations is to be able to get it to 120 days. We're nowhere near that target right now, but our goal is to be there within the next few years with some of the improvements.
Is that a realistic goal, you think?
It's a realistic goal when we have the ability for us to if we're looking at an active investigation time frame of 120 days. Once we start working in the case management type activities of arrest and conviction cases that you're just tracking, it's not realistic. But for our active consumer complaints, it's an attainable goal. I will say, like, we have one case that's been open for 6 years, and it opened on an arrest case, and we're still waiting for a conviction. So it's, those are the kind of things that you put the sunset report together and the number doesn't look good, but how much of that time was actual investigation time? At this point, it's still 0.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Did I hear 170 complaints in Q1?
Yes.
172.
172, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the other, while we're talking about complaints received, the other improvement we're making with the enforcement program is really working on training our intake person to be able to be able to direct cases, whether it's to desk investigations, special investigations, or the Division of Investigations directly. Under our current process, they receive it and it goes to an analyst, and then the analyst has to figure out where to route it from there, whether to take it and investigate themselves or refer out. So we're trying to cut some time frames there as well by just sending it directly to kind of the unit it needs to go to at intake. I think I will move on to pending regulations, and some of this is going to end up overlapping with a lot of the committee reports that are forthcoming later today. With our regulations, we've put a lot of effort over these last few months on really getting proposals discussed through committees, getting action, getting input and feedback, so that we can develop text that's going to work, that we can move it forward. We've been very effective with that. Where we've continued to struggle is with getting the packages complete to the point that we can put them out for public comment. So that's something that I've identified as a concern a few times, and kind of reached out with the department to try to get some additional resources and help, because one of our biggest struggles with staff right now is at one point we had a full management team, but now we're down one management position. But where we're truly struggling is with analytical staff that can perform a lot of our policy work. So a lot of that gap is being just completed right now with the management team. We've tried a few different directions to try to address that. One idea that we had come up with was trying to find a retired annuitant who's very with experience and kind of interest in policy work that we could bring on board and help us address a lot of our regulations. Unfortunately, I did a lot of looking on the directory of available RAs who are interested in returning to state service, and I wasn't quite finding someone that was the right fit. So we're pivoting a little bit, but we're working very closely with our regulatory council with a goal of all of the packages that you see where it's talking about We're preparing that package, and we plan to submit it for DCA for review in October. Really working very closely with our council to make that happen so that we can get them out to notice here at the beginning of the year and formally kick off that regulatory process where we can get the public comment on those regulations, issue any modified text if need be, and be able to adopt the regulations in 2024. So we're in a good place. It's just we've kind of accumulated that. We had that backlog of regs that were just sitting and doing nothing. We got them through the concept discussion phase. We got text. Now we've got a little bit of a chunk that we need to get forward and out to public comments. That's the focus for the remainder of the calendar year. And then we've got a few more in the works that we're also going to be working through the committee level. So with those, we have our regulation on simply updating our licensing and regulatory fee amounts that are in our regulations. I touched on it earlier, but the challenge with that package just has to do with the age of some of the forms that are incorporated by reference and tracking down the original version of that form that we can update through OAL. Because unfortunately, some of the versions they've touched over time and trying to be able to use the correct form and get that updated. So we're working with our regulatory council to do that. We're also working to implement our SB 1434. So that's updating that public address of record and implementing the requirement for telephone numbers and email addresses, which as we implement that one, it's going to open up the gate for us to be able to more effectively communicate with licensees by being able to send them emails, which will be really beneficial. We've got text on delegation of authority to it was originally branded as the Assistant Executive Officer. We'll discuss that one later today under the Government Public Affairs Committee report. Really did a lot of review on that text. In a lot of ways simplified it to something that I think will work really well. So we'll talk about that. Continuing education, we've been continuing to make progress on writing that package. What we've done is we took the text that was approved in April, and we took the text for how to handle with the petitioners with their continuing education requirement, putting that all in one package. That's the primary focus, and we're going to have that one out to public comment likely December or January, so that we can still hit our planned implementation date of January 1st, 2025. We've got basic life support certification for licensees. That's still in a concept development phase. Staff's done a little bit of work of kind of researching some of the information and questions that the committee had around how to make necessary accommodations. We also talked with some other DCA boards, and surprised to find that a lot of those boards weren't encountering those issues. So we're going to be kind of first through the gate to be able to have language that will address those issues. We've got one of the more unique packages has to do with how we handle our initial licensure process, because we've now got 3 prongs to it. I'm going to touch on a little bit when we get to agenda item 10, but we were working on a package around temporary licensure for military spouses. We now have, there's also now there's the federal legislation that allows someone to come to California to practice under federal guidance where they don't actually need a license here and they can register. So we have that. We also now have a bill that requires that we open it up for the Skill Bridge program. So what we're doing with that package on temporary licensure for military spouses is also being able to make necessary updates to the form where we can kind of incorporate all of these different requirements into one form. So once we get that worked out, we plan to have some text and discussion by the board in January on that so we can move it forward. Got a few of the CPEI proposals where we're just drafting up those proposals so we can get them out to public comment. We have record-keeping requirements for chiropractic patient records. Done quite a bit of work on that. That's one of the items that we plan to have for discussion by the Enforcement Committee at the upcoming meeting in November. And another one for November Enforcement Committee is around disciplinary guidelines and uniform standards. This one's been kind of a long time coming. We've taken it in pieces and talked about the different policy implications of different portions of the guidelines. We just need to finish putting it together and vet that through regulatory council and ideally have some text, if not at the January meeting, by the April meeting of the board, so we can move that one forward. We've also got the evaluation process for petitions for reinstatement, reduction of penalty, or early termination of probation. That proposal was last discussed by the Enforcement Committee at their June meeting, and we're planning to bring it forward to the board in January. The reason being some of the things that we're working through specific to disciplinary guidelines overlaps a bit with that proposal, so we want to make sure that we've got got things, we have consistency, and we've got 2 proposals that'll work. So we're looking at January on that one. As I get further out on my list, a lot, the licensing committee, I can't acknowledge them enough on all the work they've been doing around the chiropractic college curriculum requirements, the educational requirements, and just our role in regulating the chiropractic colleges. I know there's much to come in 2024 on those proposals as we work through those issues. Another one, CPEI proposal that we're going to need to bring forth to the licensing committee has to do with the potential for being able to order mental or physical examinations of applicants. We currently have that authority to do so for licensees, but exploring whether we're going to have regulations that allow us to extend the same over to an applicant if evidence exists that there may be something that would pose a safety risk to the public if that examination was not conducted. That one's going to be a little bit of a difficult lift in that we're going to have to be able to clearly define what those circumstances are under which we can pursue that. Another one that we've done quite a bit of discussions on over 2023 had to do with the role of unlicensed individuals at chiropractic practices. A lot of the feedback and input that we got from the enforcement committee was very helpful on this proposal. We're taking a lot of that feedback, and then also actually the director had shared some information with me on with the role and the structure around medical assistance. So I think we have a pretty good solution that kind of blends both together that we can provide and bring to the enforcement committee for discussion in November.
On that, just real quick, I just jogged my memory is that when we were at the FCLB, Jason Hume from Tennessee we might incorporate some discussion of that because he teaches a class on behalf of, I think it's NBCE, that is a certification for chiropractic assistants. That's a big passion of his, so might be something for us to just jog my memory when you were talking about that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'll reach out. That could be a good presentation.
It's already in place and teaches it. I think he does it in person as well as online.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely bring that information to the meeting. Let me see here, and then we've got the very comprehensive update to the continuing education package in the works, getting that one out soon for public comment. There are 2 kind of tail proposals that were set aside that were also had to do with continuing education, and that will likely bring forward to the continuing education committee for discussion at their upcoming meeting. I believe it's December 1st. With those ones, we had discussed probably about 18 months ago, we had started talking about how to handle cases where we needed to either exempt or reduce a requirement or maybe potentially provide an extension to licensees under special circumstances, such as whether it's a natural disaster, health-related concerns, anything to that effect. We want to revisit that discussion so that we can get that moving again. And then another one had to do with it's actually a holdover from the board's prior discussion of CE before we kind of revamped it into its current solution, and that was that had to do with the appeal process for courses that have been denied by the board. Currently, we don't have anything in the regulation that really defines what that process is. So as you may recall, because we've only had one in recent years, that hearing then ended up being a formal hearing with an attorney or with the administrative law judge. It's very expensive for the board. The board had discussed potentially being able to update that process to where the appeal goes through maybe the continuing education committee and what that could look like, but being able to put that process in regulation so that we don't need to default to a formal hearing before an administrative law judge to hear that appeal. So we want to revisit that discussion as well and kind of where we go next with those remaining proposals. Not hearing any questions on that. I'll continue going forward. Let me see if I covered everything here. And then also within the meeting materials, included a copy of the tracker for that Solid developed for our strategic plan objectives, and then we also have the issues from Sunset Review. Rather than go through each objective, because there are quite a few of them, I would just like to ask if there were any questions on that report on the strategic plan objectives.
That was helpful, showing where progress is, what's completed, what's in progress, what's pending. That's great.
I would just ask the question about, I think it was issue number 3 and the planning session. We'll get an idea of the timeframe for that and.
Oh, right. Yeah, so I meant to include that in my update. So as far as the strategic plan objective, as you'll recall, this past fall, DCA had conducted like gathering stakeholder input, specifically related to DEI and the governor's executive order requiring under California for All that we integrate that into our strategic plan. So they conducted an information gathering this fall. They're currently compiling a report based on the feedback that they received in response to the survey. And then from there, we're anticipating at the January board meeting, Solid's going to facilitate some sort of session where we're going to revisit our existing strategic plan and determine whether we need to make any adjustments or insert any additional objectives so that it's consistent with the governor's executive order. So as I gather more information on that, I'll release it. And as we have that report, I'll share it with the board so you can begin reviewing. At this point, it's looking like it's probably going to be a facilitated discussion, first presentation of a report, but then kind of a facilitated discussion of revisiting the existing strategic plan. But as I know more, I'll share it with the board.
Ms. Walker?
Mm-hmm.
I had a question on issue 2. It mentions the current status. In addition, there's new training requirements on the regulatory process for staff.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just explain that a little bit more, what that is?
Sure. Yeah, it ties into our strategic plan objective on just improving the efficiency of our regulations process. And one of the ways that we felt we could get there is making sure that so DCA offers training on the regulatory process. They also have a lot of resources available for staff. And then the Office of Administrative Law is really the gold standard for that regulations training. And so we're implementing a requirement that any of our staff at or above the AGPA Associate Governmental Program Analyst position level go through the formal OAL training so that they're familiar on how to prepare a regulation package and they understand the process and all of the steps involved.
So, I mean, it's probably not pertinent, but as I read it, I was just wondering if any of that training would be pertinent to board members to maybe facilitate as we're carrying these discussions on proposing regulation, having any background understanding of that regulatory process. And you know what the training is, I don't. Would that help the board members be a little bit more efficient with staff as far as, or is there nothing there?
The training itself is a bit in the weeds for I think what the board members would want, but one thing that I could request and likely deliver during a board meeting that I think would be very helpful is just to have DCA's regulations unit just do an overview of the regulatory process for the board, and then kind of gear that material specifically to your role and what you would want to know. I think they can easily synthesize that down into maybe a 20-30 minute presentation that I think would be very, very helpful for the board and probably further support that strategic plan objective.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And then it looks like, the issue number 10 on misinformation. I know that the staff is tracking that. Is there, are we still having issues with that? Is there, big topics or trends that are occurring with misinformation? I know there was a bunch going on with the pandemic. Is that still occurring?
No, I wouldn't say that it's not still occurring. We're not getting complaints. One area where we want, especially as we can get that number of pending cases down, we want to be a little bit more proactive in being able to, really try to identify things that could be going on out there. One of the challenges, and Dr. Adams kind of highlighted it when he was talking about social media, is a lot of this is occurring either through social media or sometimes it's occurring during like an actual patient encounter. Those are good cases for us to work on when it occurs during a patient encounter. But with social media, sometimes we struggle with whether it's a professional profile as, doctor, whoever, or if it's an actual personal profile, and we're seeing a lot of stuff on the personal side. Also really actually liked the, the comment that Dr. Adams made about the potential for disclaimers. Because we're not necessarily seeing misinformation, we're actually seeing more of just social media in general, and a lot of things that are almost could be classified more as entertainment than actual clinical care, but there's no disclaimer there. So when you see something that goes viral, whether it be on Instagram or TikTok, some of that will drive complaints to the board, and I think something like a disclaimer could be an effective solution there.
Okay. And I didn't mention it earlier, but it sort of relates to this a little bit. You had mentioned that the board spends a significant amount of money on enforcement, and it sort of ties back to reaching out to CCA, ACA, and the schools. I'm wondering if at some point the board has a more proactive role in education, like an educational, promotional thing as far as, really advertising for licensees, enforcement issues to sort of head off, one, for public safety, and two, sort of head off where we're spending a lot of our time, and be more proactive about it.
Yeah, and we agree, and that's part of it becomes kind of intertwined, but within the strategic plan objective, we've met with DCA about updating our website, and there's different phases to that project, but one of the biggest and the current phase we're in is being able to develop the materials that are going to go on the website, and we're working with a lot of different things where it can be beneficial for the public, but also the licensees. So there's going to be a lot to come on getting those materials, and then being able to to pull little bits and pieces out of it to then use it as public messaging, put it on social media, and do different things with it. So that's more of what's to come in 2024.
Great, thank you.
If I could just add to that too, I think we've done a pretty good job in the last few years at least in taking advantage of opportunities to engage and have those discussions with stakeholders, and whether it's on the board's behalf or whether it's just a board member maybe participating in a CE event or a discussion panel on those things, and we have a few those opportunities. It's the more you do, the more you're asked to do it. So I think that's a good trend, and I think we'll continue to do that and kind of raise the awareness piece of what we hope is like change management, long term for our licensees. So
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking of those licensees, maybe that sort of stay to themselves, don't go a lot of, conventions, that sort of thing, like, all that work is great, but also reaching those people that aren't actively engaged and, giving them those reminders of what is required in your records and what is not okay now, those little blurbs that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think just to add on to that point, as we get the email addresses of the licensees, we'll figure out a way to facilitate it. But it'd be helpful if we could start sending emails and give them the, if it's specific to just little reminders about licensing and enforcement, providing them the option to opt out if they don't want to continue to receive that level of interaction from the board. But just being able to reach them directly, because like you said, some of that stuff, it relies on them, being proactive in either attending events or following our social media, checking the website. But how do we reach them directly? I think as we get those direct email addresses, you can automate notices and just give them more kind of real-time updates of what's going on and what we're seeing.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, I have one item for the kind of attachment to kind of the, I'm gonna say Excel spreadsheet, but what's it called? I think something that would be helpful for me, because I was looking through kind of the different due dates, right? And I was like, a number of things are definitely kind of in progress and continue to be in progress. I'm not sure if there'd be opportunity to have an additional kind of spot for where we're forecasted to be able to accomplish, because this is what we thought we were going to do. This is at least based on our existing circumstances when we think we're going to be able to land on it. So because as I was reviewing it, I was trying to figure out, okay, will we be able to hit that final deadline, given some of the delays?
Got it. Yeah, that's thank you for that. Yeah, we'll modify that column a bit with the the completion dates, but then if we have the original goal date and actual current projection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Are you,
Beyond answering questions, that really concludes my update.
okay, thank you. I imagine you need a sip of water. Thank you for that. That was very thorough and really appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I do have a question. Under number one, really appreciate the kind of dashboard look here. I think that's really helpful. There's a lot on there, but it makes it really kind of productive to look at. And under our success measure 1.4.3, the budget has been a big issue for this board, and we've made a lot of efforts to address that. And so it says here, the quarterly budget meetings with the budget analysts at DCA, and that's been completed, so those are being done.
Mhm.
Wondering if you could give us some update or feedback on what's coming out of those meetings. And
So what's been really helpful about just really making sure that we're engaging quite a bit with our budget analysts, DCA, is when it comes to forecasting and knowing what's coming up, where we're at, making sure that we're tracking. We have budgeted line items for each of our fee amounts, particularly when you get into like disciplinary cases. So it's establishing that communication where we're really tracking, how much are we spending at the AG's office? Where are we have savings in these line items? And making sure that budgets is on the same page with us, so there's no surprises, and that we don't end up in a position that we were in. A few years ago, we were in a position where we were caught a bit off guard because historically, the board always underspent the budget, but just didn't have enough revenue coming in, so that was driving the problem. But we were actually ended up in a position, it was in 2020, where we ended up with the opposite, where we still had the revenue issue, but almost surprise, we also spent way more money at the Attorney General's office than we had budgeted for, so we also needed to get a budget augmentation, which is something that had never really been a problem before, because historically the board always underspent that line item, but due to COVID and kind of the compaction of cases, we ended up in one fiscal year spending way more money in a line item that nobody had really tracked all that much because it wasn't a problem in the past. So we're doing a lot more proactively to track as we go through months and we go through quarters to make sure that we're, if we're 25% through the year, you don't want to see a budget where you've already spent 40%. You want to be at 25 or lower, and making sure we've got those dialed in. And also just communicating our needs for when we have to upgrade equipment. The meetings were also really helpful for coming up with our plan for repaying our outstanding bar loan. So we now have the $250,000 annual repayments, so we can have that finally roll off in 6 years. So things like that have just been really helpful by making sure we're having that communication with the budget office.
good, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up on that. Have we, with the fee increases that we did, with the CE, has that generated what we had hoped to help backfill what's the term we used, subsidizing that was going on for a long time?
It remains to be seen a little bit at this point, because with the way it was implemented, and a lot of the continuing education providers really front-loaded those applications so that they paid the flat fee. So we haven't really gotten to measure the full effect yet. We're likely going to see that later this spring as we get into this fiscal year. I would say with our current budget position we're in a stable spot in that we have enough revenue to sustain us. But unfortunately, we're still in a position where when you look long-term and plan for full expenditures, we're still seeing a minor decrease in our fund condition, which you don't want to see, because we want to be in the position where we're rebuilding the fund. So when our months in reserve is still steadily declining over time, we're in an okay position, but we are closely tracking that, because we may need to revisit that DC license fee amount probably in a year or two, just to make sure that we have sufficient funding. And then, but like I said, the issue with those projections is that it assumes we spend the entire budget. We generally spend under. So working closely with the budget office, but just right at the top of mind is potentially the need to revisit that DC license renewal fee.
And along the lines with the regulatory comment that was earlier about, it seems, and this is a perception, is it seems that certain things, like I think of the fee increase regulation that we implemented, it was like that. It went really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Other things like enforcement issues and CE, packages that we voted on and passed are still not gone to public comment. So,
yeah.
I mean, is it allocation of time to certain things, or is it, it seems like we've been talking about the regulatory language of these things and for a long time.
And that's an accurate description of it. I tell you the distinction between the two is that fee increase that went into effect went through legislation, and everything we're trying to do through regulation takes much longer. So ideally, and it's part of a much larger discussion if the board ever wanted to entertain it, with the fact that we have the Initiative Act. So that constrains us in many ways because we can't go to the legislature and say, we want this continuing education program and have it become effective in 6 to 9 months, just, the snap of a finger. You have to go through the formal regulatory process. The biggest challenge we're having with the continuing education one was just the amount of time that it had been discussed and discussed and discussed before we got to where we ended up. So putting that package together to justify how we got everywhere has been quite the challenge. And just the amount of documentation. OAL is always increasing the requirements on what they'll allow. If you were to look through our current regulations now, where you just see single sentences and it's like, well, why can't we do that? Even Anthony's shaking his head, they don't allow that anymore. So that's really the challenge, is like OAL is really scrutinizing packages very closely. They're always raising the bar on expectations. And we're really constrained because we can't do the stuff through legislation currently due to the Initiative Act.
So is that in a sense what's the holdup within some of the enforcement stuff? We were doing smaller bites. We thought that would speed it up, but because those are kind of starting to stack up a little bit.
Yeah, it still did. It's just a matter of us making sure we can get all that documentation and get it pushed out to public comment. We expect it to go much smoother through the OAL process once we get it out and into that process, given that it's a smaller, singular issue proposal. Because the challenge that when you try to move an entire proposal is if there's a holdup on one piece, it now affects the whole thing. But by us picking each piece, if there's that one issue, it's only holding up that issue.
Is that what's holding up the CE, the large regulatory package that we did? Is it the minute things that are happening?
It's more of just the staff resources available for us to be able to get all of the documentation done on that. Has really been the challenge for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Walker, I had a separate question. Were you going to go over the assembly bills, or is this a good time for me to ask some questions on that?
You can go ahead and ask questions on it. So our next agenda item is on legislation that becomes effective at the beginning of the year. I have the updates, and I believe the other bills I have in there, they were all dead for 2023, but happy to answer any questions on those as well.
Yeah, so I know we're working on the wood bill. I had a question on the low bill. It's gone dormant, and I was just wondering if there was more information on why.
I don't have that available now. I'll get that for the board in 2024. I would expect that bill to likely reactivate. It's just, it's kind of one of those, when they get to the last minute and they're trying to shuffle bills, they prioritize. And a lot of bills, even sometimes with no reasoning, just end up being held or for the year.
And then my other question was on the McKinner bill. I know that we talked about it in our last meeting. At least Dr. Adams and I shared some concerns about what that would mean, and that we wanted more of an opposition, and that was given to legal. And so I'm just wondering where we are with that. Have we developed a language around that, or?
So the board took an opposed position on that bill. We're going to revisit the discussion of that bill at the January meeting, just if there's any, because we're going to communicate that over to the author's office as they kind of reactivate that bill for 2024, and we want to get ahead of it. So in January, that'll be one of the discussion items, is if the board has any suggestions or amenable to, beyond just oppose, is there something that could work for that bill, or is it just we're going to remain in a opposed position?
Well, I think at the last meeting and talking with council, and that we ended up, that we really felt like the whole thing had to go back instead of piecemealing. So I thought we had agreed on that. Dr. Adams, I think you were part of that feeling. So.
Yeah, so we'll communicate that information to the author's office as they begin looking at the bill for 2024, and then we'll provide it as an update at the January meeting if there's anything additional. That bill is actually at least twice now. It's tried to go through under similar language. Actually, this bill mirrors the same bill that we saw in the last session. So I'm not sure whether or not this thing is actually going to move forward or not. The board opposition could potentially help hold it.
Okay, and, Go ahead.
Just as a point of order, would it be okay if I close out agenda item number 9 before we continue to move on any of the legislation?
Well,
Well, this is
if she's
part of
asking, yeah,
nine.
if she's asking about my updates on any of the bills that aren't being implemented.
Oh,
This is
we're
only
doing
those,
it.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
This is part of
Yeah.
nine.
Gotcha,
This is
okay.
part of 9.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then my last question was on the last bill, SB 372. I think that's one I had additional concerns about, the ramifications of, if things got posted incorrectly as an error, and what the legal ramifications are for the board. We've been down this road in another traumatizing situation, and so, mistakes happen, information gets entered incorrectly, and so, legal's here. I'm just, with this particular bill and the sensitivity of the information, at some point, I feel like a mistake may be made, and then how is the board protected against those legal ramifications and financial ramifications?
So on that, if I recall, this bill is more about what the board is posting going forward, right?
Correct, and
Sort
I'm
of-
concerned if information is, it's not, posted, it's a day
Accurately.
late, or it's misspelled, or
Right.
it's, there's a mistake made,
Yeah.
Somebody reads the line incorrectly.
I don't remember, I remember reviewing this bill, but I don't remember sort of an explicit sort of, I don't want to use the word damages, but an explicit sort of, other than calling it to staff's attention to address and fix, I'm not aware of any increased liability as a result of this.
Yeah, my concern is California is one of the most litigious
Well,
states
yeah.
in the country.
Yeah.
And so things that we have thought in the past would not have a ramification, or there's no way that this would move forward to a case has. And so I guess I just want to make my comment stated and just see if there's any proactive, is there anything to,
I think what she's getting at is that there's, mistakes happen, right?
Sure.
Okay, so a mistake happens in a post,
Yep.
staff doesn't get a pronoun right or something like that right.
Right.
And the next thing you know, it's
Or
an
they-
innocent mistake,
Yeah.
but damages. Because,
And that's
because
happened
somebody
to
looks
us.
at it,
Okay.
because somebody looks
Yes.
at it and goes, well, that caused me this or this or this.
Yeah.
Instead of there being an allowance, like, okay, mistakes are made, we're human, somebody hit a key this way or that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, along those lines. I think that's what she's referring to,
I
is
see.
that
And
y-
so-
you can see how, I mean, there's so many layers to this
Yeah.
aspect
Yeah.
that,
So, just so because this will be something I'll have to get back to you on, but your specific question is, does this bill, the passage of this bill, increase any liability?
I mean, when I read it, it does, because people make mistakes,
Sure.
and California is very litigious, people
Yeah.
are very concerned about how things are written in protection of their information, which is understandable. But I'm concerned about the ramifications or the impact if a mistake is made. And again, we've had experience with an innocent mistake being made and then significant financial ramifications that occurred from that. so.
Okay.
for example, I look at this right off the bat and I go, okay, so let's say somebody decides to have a gender change. What is their requirement to follow to do that? Is it just something they can just decide one day and then send a notice into the board, and the board says that? Well, so what if something sits in someone's pile or someone's processing, because the staff is busy, and that change doesn't get made?
First.
The website, the online operating website that we have
Isn't reflecting.
is not reflecting that immediate, their expectation that, you know, I send something in, you know, 7 days later, I'm still A, and I said B. And that person hasn't got to that yet. Is there damage? Is there a grace period? Is there something that can be worked in the bill that says, hey, we've got to give people allowances, you know, give people time, you know,
And like the previous bill, there's a section which that McKenna bill says, you know, if done in good faith, then, you know, the licensee won't be, you know, liable, but I don't see that
I mean, that
in
opens it
this
up,
bill.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that opens it up, is that, you know, then it becomes determined, it's like proving intent.
Correct.
You know, was it good faith enough? Well, I don't think so. Well, I think I did, you know, it becomes a very arbitrary thing. Anyway, I think that's where I feel on that particular
That's
thing
helpful.
is.
I can let you guys know.
Yeah.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
I have one question, going back to the dashboard. What's it called? Before I go into this comment, I want to acknowledge the incredible progress we've absolutely made. I would say from my, first couple months on the board to, I would say this past year, just the amount of fast forward we've been living in terms of the amount of things we review. The one area I want to bring up is kind of where we haven't seen some progress. I know one area was in kind of item 2.3, just because I know it's pending staff. So that's completely understandable in terms of being able to staff that item. But the other one, item 1.2, I'm wondering, because a number of items within that section 1.2 is in progress. I'm wondering if there might be a need separate from our routine licensing committee to commit time to some of these items.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion, because I think, you know, Dr. Daniels is doing an amazing job as the chair, but kind of just thrown you both right in there into actually working through just things as we can put them on an agenda. I think that's an excellent suggestion, that we kind of carve out some time so that we can make some progress specific to the strategic plan in that area. And then the other one that you mentioned, I did want to also note, had to do with the effectiveness of our expert witness program. So we are kickstarting that one, because we've recognized that need. So like we're looking, although we're a little bit behind on a lot of those projected dates in 2023, we do plan to see quite a bit of movement here as we head into probably about summer 2024 on that. That concludes my report. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? This is good discussion. Is there anything else? Okay. None from me, so hearing none, I would open agenda item number 9 for public comment. Anyone from the public has a comment on the executive officer's report and updates? Seeing none, I'll move us to agenda item number 10, and an update and discussion on implementation of the 2023 legislation affecting the board. And again, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Walker.
This agenda item will be much more brief. We just wanted to provide an update to the board on our implementation of the legislation that had recently passed, and for the most part will become effective January 1, 2024. With the exception of our first bill on the list, which is AB 883, Mathis. It has to do with the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program. So I had touched on this during my executive officer report. But what this bill does is, beginning July 1st of 2024, it's going to require that DCA boards expedite, and it also authorizes us to assist the initial licensure process for an applicant who supplies satisfactory evidence to the board that they're an active duty member of a regular component of the armed forces, and they were enrolled in the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program. As far as implementing this bill, we're already working on the temporary licensure process for military spouses, and where the challenge with that one was uncovering then how do you get them to permanent licensure, and how do we make sure that those regulations truly reflect that process. Our goal is to roll this requirement. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing I'm really seeing as far as regulations is when we talk about satisfactory evidence, defining what that means so we can put it into a regulation, and then making sure that we add the question to the application to inquire whether an applicant qualifies for this expedite opportunity. So we're going to work on that. We're going to merge it together with that other proposal that we were talking about, so we can move both concepts at the same time, because they're going to overlap and they both affect the same process. So we're working with Regulatory Council on that. Ideally, we'd like to have some text before the board in January 2024. Really doesn't require policy discussion in terms of how to implement it. So that's kind of the purpose of not needing to bring it to a committee and just bring it directly to the board. Most of our regulations do go through a committee discussion, but some of these, they're pretty straightforward on their implementation. So the plan is to bring it directly to the board. Are there any questions on that bill? Okay, I'll move on to the next one. AB 1707. This is another bill that what this bill is going to do is prohibit a DCA Healing Arts Board from either denying an application for a licensure or suspending, revoking, or disciplining a license on the basis of a judgment, conviction, or disciplinary action in another state if that conduct would have been lawful here in California. With this bill, we're not anticipating that it's going to even affect a large number of our licensees. It really has to do with a lot of reproductive health and gender affirming care issues that our licensees, unless they hold multiple types of licenses in different professions, generally aren't performing in other states. But we are aware of the bill, making sure that our enforcement staff is also aware of the bill, and then we're going to be making sure that we cross-reference the bill in our disciplinary guidelines when you're considering taking action based on an action that was taken by another state, just to make sure that it's very clear that you can't try to pursue this type of discipline under these types of circumstances. It's also something that I would say when we're evaluating enforcement cases, we always evaluate the underlying conduct anyways before we proceed with action. So this is really something that we're not anticipating any difficulty in implementing. Seeing no questions, I'll go to some of the other ones. So we have SB 143 on here. Is a budget trailer bill. If you read the whole thing, I'm very proud of you for reading the entire bill, because really it has two provisions within the bill that affect the board. Ms. Durante's updated us already on the one provision that allows us to return to being able to host remote meetings through the end of the calendar year without having to disclose public locations. So as we get into the committee meetings this fall, we're going to be just like they were last spring, where you can participate remotely. We'll be hosting them via WebEx, but you don't have to identify your location. You don't have to open it to the public. You can just participate remotely from wherever you have internet access, and can support a video connection. The other portion of the bill implements the new federal law on license portability for service members and their spouses. And it implements a registration process for the board to be able to receive a copy of the military orders, receive a copy of the marriage certificate if applicable, and then be able to create a public posting so that the public can search and identify these people that are practicing under that authority from another state, but they're here on military orders. So the Department of Consumer Affairs is really taking the lead on that entire project. They've got, the legal office has been providing a lot of guidance to the boards on the implementation of the bill. And then the Department's Office of Information Services is developing a tool so that service members and their spouses can apply directly to the board, and that information that's submitted will get transmitted directly to the programs. And they're also working on developing a registration tool that's going to be, from what I understand, it's going to be separate from DCA Search, but another resource to where the public can go to search if they're seeing a practitioner who's not necessarily licensed here, they're just registered with us holding out-of-state licensure on those military orders, but they can still verify that they've been registered. So that's where we're at with that, is getting that stood up. We're not anticipating any regulations or anything beyond the legislation to bring that into effect. And then we'll share that tool as it's available with the board members, so you can see what it actually looks like and where you need to click. And we're going to make sure that it's accessible to the public, so that we're putting that information out, because there's a lot of familiarity with DCA Search, but making sure the public knows. If you don't find somebody on DCA Search, also check this resource. Just make sure they're not on that list as well. And then that brings me to SB 372. We touched on the legal question around that bill. For purposes of this agenda item, I'm going to talk about the implementation of this bill. This is another one where the department is really providing all the guidance and technical assistance that we need for us to be able to implement this bill and these requirements. Once again, DCA's Office of Information Services is really creating a tool to where licensees that need to make these types of changes to their profile can make the request. They can upload the necessary documentation and send it to the programs. And then they're also working on the back end to ensure that on the technical side, DCA search is performing as expected. So that means that when we receive those requests and in our central database, when we change a name or if we update a name, we don't put gender information on the website, but when we update a name, we enter, the way they've described it to us is that we would enter a secondary status code that knows that it's specific to this population, and what that's going to do is then trigger all the necessary changes to DCA search to remove prior information or mask things that shouldn't be posted. As far as that implementation process, because I did hear quite a few concerns of, well, what if there's a mistake? I just wanted to also assure the board that those changes aren't made by just one staff person. We have staff, and then they go through a manager as well, and both people will be not only making the change and ensuring that the back-end database is correct, but they're also going to personally visit the DCA search public profile and ensure that it's reflecting as it should, because that's one of the benefits of DCA search is it really does update in real time. So when we make changes or we remove things, that's the first thing we do is then go and look on DCA search to make sure it's reflected as it should. So we've got that in our process. So just wanted to provide a little bit of assurance there. There's, Anthony will get back to us on the legal issue and aspect, but we are ensuring there's checks in place that we process them accurately. Next on my list, Yvonne also covered this one as SB 447. So by repealing that out-of-state travel ban, what that does is opens up the opportunity for us to be able to send 2 of our board members, ideally to the 97th FCLV meeting in their annual meeting in May 2024 in Phoenix, Arizona. To us, especially with the limited time frame between now and the trip, is that with it being in Arizona, by it being a border state, it eliminates some of the hurdles in us getting that approval. So we'll be working on that, and then being able to send our 2 members. Traditionally, we send the board chair and the vice chair. So as we find out in January who those individuals are, that will be ideally or likely who we would be sending to that meeting come May. We also, last but not least, on the update for legislation is SB 544, and that Meeting Act and specifically teleconferencing. There's quite a bit to this bill. The one thing I really want to highlight on it is that the existing Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act has not changed. So our existing, what we're doing here today, a physical in-person meeting, nothing has changed on that. When we hold a teleconference meeting like we did in July, nothing has changed. That is still the same. But what it also now does is gives us this additional alternative set of provisions where we can hold another type of public meeting by teleconference, where we have a majority of members present in one location, and then you can have additional members participating remotely from remote locations that aren't disclosed in the meeting requirement. They've got various requirements in there on how you actually do that, but those remote participants would need to disclose whether any individual is 18 years of age or older are in the room present with them, and just a general description of that relationship between them and that individual. And then it also would require that under that structure that all members visibly appear on camera, except for when it's technologically impracticable, and they've got some definitions of what that means. And then you also have to provide a mechanism for the public to be able to attend and participate virtually in the meeting. And I believe it's at the same level of the participants at the board. So you can't have, WebEx, but then give a different platform for the public. With this bill, as far as the implementation, really my recommendation for the board is to continue with the meetings as we've traditionally been doing them for at least the beginning of the year. Let's see how if any of the other programs kind of adopt this model. If it's something that's working well, we can kind of consider it. My real recommendation for the January meeting is stick with a traditional teleconference meeting like we've been hosting. We can use WebEx as well, so that we have the increased public participation. But let's not be the first ones through the gate on trying this new model. Let's let DCA continue providing guidance to us, and then we can test it at a future meeting. The biggest The biggest challenge with this model is if you have a majority of public members present to hold a meeting, and then that remote connection is lost, you now can have no meeting, even though you've got everybody you need already present in a room to conduct business. So it's another provision that's available to us. The bill went through a number of changes throughout the summer, particularly just in response to a lot of feedback they were receiving about really ensuring there was the ability for the public to be present and to be at the meetings. So that's how it kind of evolved into what we're seeing here. But at this point, implementation is just that we have it as another tool available to us, but we really aren't recommending at this point that we try it out for January. We should stick with a traditional teleconference meeting with your public locations disclosed, just like we've been doing for the past few years.
I have a quick question just to clarify. So you would have a quorum at the primary location, right? The majority?
Majority of members is the language in the bill.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, yeah, not necessary. Okay.
And that's only, you only have to worry about that if you also have members in an undisclosed location, right? Because
And they have to be on camera,
right.
and if
There's
they fall
strings.
off,
Right.
you have to, what if you have a quorum at the primary location? It still doesn't matter if one of the members, even if it doesn't reduce you below.
And I think that's why Ms. Walker's saying, you know, the ideal situation is what you've been doing, and even you have actually more flexibility doing the traditional teleconference environment where you could have one member here, 2 members here, 1 member. You don't need a quorum in one physical location. If
Yeah.
everybody's reporting their locations, you don't all have to be in one physical location.
Right.
It's only when you want to add that extra step of not disclosing locations above a quorum for certain members. That's
Okay.
when you run into all the strings that she's talking about, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Understood.
Why would anybody want to do that? Too many
Well-
problems.
Yeah, that was probably some of the thinking that went into it. But, yeah. Different logistical hurdles
Yeah.
depending upon
Yeah.
different comfort levels too, so.
Well, in the COVID era, you might have somebody who's able to,
Yeah, it's,
remotely.
it's something we
last
can,
minute.
it's something we can certainly consider. I'm trying to think of a possible scenario where it's more to our benefit, but the only one that really comes to mind if,
I like your suggestion.
Somebody's
I mean,
quarantined or
It's
something.
been working.
yeah. Okay.
I mean, I don't think any of us had a problem with if somebody from the public comes into our where we're at. It's not been a problem for me.
Yeah, and for me, it's easier because it's helpful. I'm in Sacramento, so I can
Yeah.
just come down to the offices because my day-to-day work, I'm like behind security guard desk, so people would normally say, just kind of opt to just be there in person.
Yeah, and that's mutually beneficial because then staff doesn't have to travel as well.
Yep.
Because with each of the locations, you're supposed to have a board member, so it works out great when you just come there and we can use it right in our building.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that concludes my update on just implementation. Like I said, not too many worries here with our 2023 legislation. They actually gave us quite a break compared to some of the prior years in terms of legislation we have to implement. But happy to answer any questions, any remaining questions on the bills.
Any questions or discussion from the board members? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Walker. I would open it up for agenda item number 10, update and discussion on implementation of 2023 legislation affecting the board. Open that up for public comment. See no public comment. I'd move us to agenda item number 11, our licensing committee report. And I will turn it over to Dr. Daniels to provide us an update.
Thank you. So we met on August 25th, and we focused on 3 issues as you have in your packet. So I'll just kind of go through that a little bit as far as little bit of the content of the conversation. So the first one is the requirements for filing places of practice with the board. And currently, a place of practice is not defined in our regulations, and the filing requirements don't address the temporary practice settings like locum tenens, sporting events, mobile practices, house calls. And it also doesn't address the available, it only has the address available, but not the name of the practitioner as well. So during the meeting, staff had presented a definition of place of practice. And I didn't see it included, but it was as any location where a licensee practices chiropractic or holds a proprietary interest in, relates to the practice of chiropractic, or any right to participate in the management, supervision, and control thereof. The committee liked the definition, but we also felt that it needed more specificity, especially with any aspect of the profession, and also not limited to a physical location. Staff is going to be working on refining that definition a little bit more so that we don't have, again, this vagueness that we've been left with. We also discussed trying to develop a more efficient way for handling corporations, with the main idea of protecting the stakeholders of, if a corporation has many chiropractors and they're coming and going, if they go out to sporting events, how does that stakeholder find out who treated them, who worked on them? Also, making it more efficient for the corporation, perhaps to have a facility permit, and that everyone that works for them who is licensed is electronically identified, by name and under that facility as well. Therefore, kind of handling, turnover and changes, so there's more of an active, updated way for a stakeholder to say, find out who treated them, who's in that facility. So we're discussing possibly creating a facility permit, and we haven't fully vetted, if there's any monetary impacts onto the board's fund if we streamline into facility permits versus individual permits. So we're still discussing that. Also, within this section, the regulation that was proposed in 2016 of May would have exempted a licensee who's practicing in a mobile setting to display their license. So the committee had concerns about that. We're concerned about an individual, say, who's at a sporting event, or someone comes to their house, and if that stakeholder is not comfortable enough to ask or knows that they can ask to see the license, we really would like it to be more forthcoming for the public and the stakeholders. So we're discussing on how to address that. Some ideas of, we really would like, even on our regular license, of some sort of QR code, so the person can scan the QR code, and having the person have to display it without the stakeholder having to ask. So the current committee didn't really like how that language was. We felt that some people just may not know or may not be comfortable in asking, and so that would be a bit exclusionary. So the next topic that we talked about was the inactive licensees certificate, and there's some concern again that, let me back up. So not only in that regulatory language, there's also that it would also mandate the requirement for the licensee to provide notice to each patient that they were licensed and regulated by a board. And you have it in your packet, I won't go through them, but there's 3 different methods of doing that. And so we're trying to streamline that and work through the language a little bit. Some of the concerns, if you have 3 different ways of doing it, you may have enforcement issues and loopholes, so we'd like to clean that up. You can, notify them on their informed consent, you can notify them on their discharge papers, you can post it. So there's many different ways, and how we do like the flexibility we're a little concerned that that might get missed by the licensees as far as, okay, what regulation, you know, are they following that regulation as far as stating and that they are, you know, licensed with a board. So the next part that we discussed was the inactive license, and you know, the regulation is very vague, and it just says not actively engaged in the practice of. And so there's been some concerns that there are licensees that have an inactive license that perhaps are performing duties that you really do need an active license for. And so we're trying to come up with defining that more clearly so that the stakeholders are protected and they clearly know who is active and who is not active. And so one aspect of any aspect of practice that requires knowledge is, you know, assessing, diagnosing, for example, performing exams, interpreting exams, the need to take x-rays, or even just referring for imaging, any treatment, exam, or manipulations of muscles, stabilizing a joint via tape. You know, there's a lot of things that require an active license that we're concerned about is not being fully followed or defined. So, and again, even obtaining a detailed health history and developing a working diagnosis. So if we have people doing, you know, QMEs and that sort of thing, you're doing an exam, you're doing an interpretation, are these people holding an active license? So we're trying to develop regulatory language that makes it very clear and not something that can't be misinterpreted as what is active and what is inactive. And we started just an initial conversation on telehealth. I wasn't aware that it came up in the Sunset Review, but I came across it when I was doing some sleuthing on reciprocity. And so it was on the Florida's website, and they have a regulation or regulatory language for telehealth, and we currently don't have one. And since the pandemic and since telehealth is here to stay, the committee is starting to have conversations about writing regulations for minimum standards of telehealth. And the acupuncture board and the occupational board have established standards, and we like a lot of what they have in there. And so we're just kind of going through and seeing what do we want to keep, what's important to us, and also what's realistic. You know, informed consent obviously is paramount, but then it brings up the question of telehealth from another state. So if you have somebody from Nebraska that's a practitioner for a patient that's in California, and then if we have the opposite, how do we maintain standards and let all our licensees know what that standard is, and also what the patients can be guaranteed to have protection as far as, is it appropriate to give this patient telehealth as a chiropractor? There's many things that we do that are not just hands-on, and so defining what those are. In addition, I had done a class on telehealth documentation for medical doctors, and you know, just to give you an example, some of the documentation requirements for telehealth, I think we also need to define is, you know, the location of all the parties, the names and the roles of the participants, the start and stop time. So it's not just sufficient to put, I spent 15 minutes with this person, but they're really wanting, I started at 12:02 and I ended at 12:37. The history and exam, and also identifying skin tone, breathing, color, if they have access to a pulse ox, getting that as well, if they have access to a blood pressure machine in their house. So height, weight, temperature, respiration weight, those are all things that are in the medical community as far as telehealth documentation. So we're kind of taking a look at that as well, and seeing what's reasonable to integrate into our regulations for that, in the sense of patient protection. And you know, that documentation I know falls a little bit with Dr. Adams. So in your committee, I think it is the documentation requirements, but
Under enforcement?
yeah,
We're working.
but also thinking of telehealth documentation requirements. So
It'd be a good overlap.
Yeah, I think there's some overlap there. So those were the three main things we talked about. I do want to mention, we have been continuing to work on the curriculum issue and the differences between, or the overly prescriptive language with California and the CCE requirements. So we've had a lot of meetings with, met with Dr. Katie Burns-Ryan from Northwestern, and have been chatted here with Dr. Anna Facchionato as well, and getting some ideas as to, and also Dr. Greg Snow and some other people, and really trying to understand the issue of what the problem is, and then how do we move forward and fix the problem. And we are stuck, with the Chiropractic Act with a particular outline. And so we're trying to identify what the problem is, and then how do we streamline it with the goal of making California less prescriptive, but also with the idea of moving education more contemporary and more forward in competition with other boards or other, like physical therapy, occupational medicine, and stuff like that. If you have any questions, I do have some notes from talking with Dr. Burns and also Dr. Anna Facchionato, so I could answer those questions, but we'll be getting, we just wanted to let you know that we've been working on that issue as well. Anything else?
No, you covered it very well.
So if anybody has any questions, you can.
Any questions, discussion?
I think it's great, especially with the telehealth, I think is an important one, and I'm glad that you guys are on top of that.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. Where do you, and based on some of these discussions you've had with different these players in the educational world, what tends to be the sense? Obviously California, a lot of these schools that are out of schools that are out of the state of California have to they have to create curriculum that meets that requirement for California, for their students to be competitive in that sense. And we're off by 200 hours, basically, right? 42 is what CCE requires, and we're at 44. Is there suggestions or thoughts about that, and what they think should be done, and where the direction you're heading on that?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. I forgot to mention that. So I have at least 3 people right now that have agreed. We're working with staff to get in a Google Docs the CA regs, but also the Initiative Act, and highlight for them what things cannot be changed. And then put it in I got them to agree, put them in a working Google Doc, and then they can highlight what is the problem that they're running into, and I can give you an example. And so they've agreed for their participation in that communication as far as identifying what the problem is, and then suggestions for how we massage the language, the regulatory language, without violating the act, but also make it more contemporary, which I think we can do actually, and the more that I get into it. But I do think it is stripping away even, Ms. Walker, I think it is even stripping away some of the vague terms that are in the regulations. An example is, it says, it'll use the term a week. Well, but it's not defined. So what is a week? Is it Monday through Saturday? Is it Sunday to and it seems like not a big deal, but it matters because there's a lot of postceptors. Like, we have a requirement of no more than 35 hours in a week, but we have postceptors that are on Saturday and Sunday. So you can see that it matters on how that we actually need to define the week to make it streamlined and make their job, easier, because otherwise they're constantly managing, did the student go over, did they hit 36 hours, and when's the start time and when's the finish time? Another problem is the California attendance of 90%. There is quite a bit of literature coming out on and I can get it for you as far as the problem with requiring attendance, and is that really the best way to go as far as from a competency-based and educational standard. But California requires 90%, and so if you have a class that meets once a week for 15 weeks, if they miss one class, they've already dropped into the 90%. And so that has to go through, they have to track that, then they have to pull that person aside, then someone has to capture that, then they have to make up the class. And so there's a lot of staff time spent sort of just making sure that they're not going under that 90%. Another section is just California requires an in-person interview unless there's a great geological distance. Well, in the pandemic, a geological distance is like, across the street during the pandemic. So it's not defined. I think there's only 4 schools that require an in-person interview. And for the cost for one school to do an interview is $2,500. And I was a little shocked, but that $2,500 is all the time it takes to coordinate the staff, to coordinate getting that person an interview. So it's financially very expensive as far as the staff time that it takes to coordinate all these things. And so these are things that are not being put into competency-based education, and it's not enhancing the student services. And so there's just, I think, a lot of work to do as far as defining these terms. And so I want to get those documents to these people. And then we also talked about doing it live at one time as far as creating a task force to kind of go through and really throw out those definitions and how to make it, more across the board. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. No, that's great. Sounds like it's been a lot of discussions.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other question, discussion from the board? I have a couple questions. One, I'm so happy to hear that the issue on multiple facilities or multiple sites, with that's been seemingly around since I've been around. And it is very common for healthcare systems to have multiple clinics or outpatient clinics associated with a hospital system, et cetera. And oftentimes their employees may work at any one place on a given day, even in the morning's notice, like
Right.
you're gonna be here today. And we're hearing that now with our corporate partners, or our corporate, I think they have companies that come in and actually do the healthcare for them. So not necessarily like Facebook is gonna be running the healthcare side, right? Yeah. The one question I had is, was there a discussion about, one concern I always have, you use the example of a sporting event. And I know that we've talked a lot about putting up, signage and even QR codes so you could check the actual active status. But what about, one of the concerns I always have is the post-treatment issues. So that patient gets treated, everything's there, they go home, and the next day there's a problem. And, so like, was there any discussion on like a legacy or a leave behind or some way to know, not I saw the group at the tent.
Well, that's exactly why we want, in that QR code is exactly who was there, or that person posting it and having it there so they can take a picture or a non-electronic way, because we want to tie, if there is a problem after, we want to be able to find that person that treated them. Is that your?
Well, I think even more, more what I was thinking was, has there been a discussion around they actually have to hand them something? So the patient actually has to receive something so that when they go away and wake up in the morning, they can take that card and go, oh, so-and-so treated me, and here's maybe the QR code, or here's the.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of
whatever
the
contact.
non-electronic version that we've been talking about as well, as far as having both options. So, I mean, yeah, we can say you have to give them something. People today, especially, they'll just be like, I don't want that piece of paper. So, you know, we want to be able to accommodate both, like,
Yeah, so some sort of post-treatment contact info.
correct,
I think.
exactly.
Okay,
That's what we're striving for.
that conversation is.
Yes,
okay,
exactly,
Perfect.
yeah.
Thank you. And then the other thing I would maybe suggest adding that I was thinking about is, and you may have discussed this, but I didn't hear it, was, even like requiring a license to render a prognosis. Because I think a lot of the, exam, the QME, IME, AME world is, done based on, kind of the final opinion is often based on just rendering a prognosis.
Yeah, and I think I just didn't say it, but I mean, that is part, you have to be licensed as an individual to form that opinion
Yeah.
as the prognosis. So that's exactly our concern, is that that's what they're doing, but that requires an active license.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then, was there a state preference? I saw Texas and Florida, and was there any sense from the committee as to what language was maybe seemingly preferable, or were we leaning?
Oh, as far as the telehealth, or?
Yeah, the telehealth language.
Well, we currently, it's our current, California's acupuncture board
Yeah.
and California's occupational board. So
Yeah.
within the state, we pulled what they are currently doing for telehealth. Florida's was very, it was, Ms. Walker could maybe remember the details, but
Yeah, Florida's was a pretty comprehensive model where it's like you would just, you registered with their board and they were actually gonna let out-of-state practitioners provide telehealth to Florida patients. It was a kind of an all-encompassing model that was just, it was pretty beyond what we would, I think what we were thinking of implementing. But really, we did that review, and the state-specific, like the other state chiropractic boards, was helpful in like getting the chiropractic language, but we actually really did like a lot of the models that we found right here within DCA, and particularly the acupuncture board, what they've kind of developed, and they're working on really closely models, probably what we think is minimum expectations that we would want as well. And they are two very closely related professions, so I think it'll work well.
yeah, I mean, some of the sticking points was that you know, have to, you know, show them your license at every subsequent visit. So there's some things that we
Yeah.
felt were, you know, a little redundant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's within our own DCA.
And then I think the last thing regarding the Google Doc and, you know, those issues, are we inviting those stakeholders or asking them to kind of bring those issues to the full board also? So that we can, like, you know, kind of get the questions out and kind of vet it out in front of the full board?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thought was, I mean, one, just getting them to agree. And so then, you know, through the licensing committee, like, you know, facilitate that and, you know, give them the groundwork as far as this is what we're looking for, this is what we need, not little minor complaints, but give us the big chunks.
Yeah.
And then bringing it back to the full board and saying, okay, you know, this is the feedback.
Yeah.
Any of them considering like attending, either WebEx or, like we've had Craig Little and we've had, who else have we've had some different people come and present or share their thoughts.
Yeah, well, Dr. Anna Faccianato, she's been, you know, she was here this morning and she's gonna be popping in.
Great.
Yeah,
Glad to
thank
get- glad
you.
to get her insight.
I really appreciate, I think, you know, one of the big goals was that we would build these relationships with our stakeholders. And I don't think there's a better example than what you've done in the licensing committee and through those efforts. So thank you to everyone on licensing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like, you know, I mentioned, you know, Dr. Katie Burns, she's from Northwestern, and she's in communication with Dr. Anna Faccianato about how to get metrics on competency-based. And so there's, you know, there's conversation and relationships, you know, going on there as far as, which is moving the idea of competency-based education and really having some information and some numbers to support that qualitative, you know, so we're not just talking to the stakeholders in California, but also in other states.
And we've invited Dr. Little to our next meeting, so
Okay,
I
great.
think, yeah, hopefully he'll be able to attend and we'll get an update. and
Okay, perfect.
Be able to quiz him.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion from board members? No, thank you, Dr. Daniels. I would open agenda item number 11, the licensing committee report for public comment. Seeing or hearing none, I would just take a quick second point of order. It is 12, a little after 12. Thoughts on, are we breaking for lunch break or?
We probably should, either now or after one more report, because I think we have 3 more committee reports to cover, then the CCE discussion, a little bit of nominations, so we'll probably wrap up, probably looking like 2:30 or 3 o'clock, so we probably should take a meal break.
Yeah, do you, is there any objection to doing one more committee report and then we'll break for lunch? Is that it? Okay.
That's good.
Okay, there's the plan. Okay, moving to agenda item number 12, the Government and Public Affairs Committee report, and I would ask Ms. Greaves to provide us an update.
Well, Dr. Daniels is a tough act to follow. So for the Government and Public Affairs Committee, we had met on September 18th. Actually, let me see here, make sure I caught the notes. Okay, we met on September 18th, and just kind of looking here, so specifically within, I would say this committee update, an action will be requested around, to consider the committee's recommendation to approve proposed text to amend CCR Title 16, Sections 306, 390.4, and 390.5, and so that we can initiate into the rulemaking process. I will kind of cover that, we'll cover that towards the end of the update. Just know that's coming. In general, in the meeting, some kind of key points of update. I know Ms. Walker had already covered kind of a lot of the items we covered in the meeting, a lot of the legislative items, kind of the budget items. I'll say one thing to note that I appreciate in terms of moving forward with the budget, something different that we'll also see, she had mentioned in one of the meetings, is that there's going to be the technology updates, right, and the need for, so those types of, I don't want to call them blips, but need for almost like capital items where that staff would need to utilize, those would like kind of be an ongoing line item versus kind of at random where it would feel at random. So it would definitely be more scheduled out so that when we see kind of forecasted budgets, we'll be able to know what to anticipate. Let's see, going in order here, the strategic plan objective 3.5, improve the board's website. We covered a lot of that. What I do want to kind of call out from the meeting when it comes to kind of enhancing the functionality and the overall user experience, Ms. Walker already touched on assessing kind of the existing website, developing the new content, and determining the layout, kind of being the real kind of steps going on there. But what I appreciate is kind of the, I would say, analytics and kind of the top topics that she had shared with us in committee, where kind of, I believe, Ally, to that meeting date, we had, of the 84,000 visits to the website, the top hits really were licenses, then renewals, then CE, then forms, then applicants. And just enforcement actions alone had 90,000 hits. And so just, there's active usage of the website itself. So I just want to kind of appreciate kind of all the effort that is going into making sure that the information's out there, it's updated, it's organized and accessible, right, that we are getting kind of active usage out of it. Let's see here. Update. And so they will continue to work with, I can't read my own writing, I'm sorry. But from what I understand in their update earlier, that we will see kind of more updates as the kind of, I would say, into springtime as they continue to work with OIS. Next section is the redesign of the board member onboarding procedure and orientation process. With this one, is I know we had been working on this for quite a bit through the year, and from my understanding is that they reached a combination of things that's been in the works. The e-folder for the board members to be able to access documentation online and just general documentation in general, the binder itself, but also the orientation approach. So I know a bit of that kind of has been, I'll say, a bit delayed, but I know we were anticipated to get stuff back in August, but I believe it's now supposed to be this fall that we should anticipate to receive some items in and around that, just really to, I would say, solidify the process. Actually, something that came up earlier down there,
Right.
what was it? Remind me.
Oh, receiving the onboarding information, the binder.
Oh, yeah, and just making
Mhm.
sure, what's it called? And even to having that available in the online.
Yeah,
the
I think that would be,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
the-
Binder.
the binder, and have it available in the folder online.
Well, also the DCA website, that some of the members weren't informed of that option. Or
Oh, yes,
for the
that
email
was-
address.
that's what it was, the email address
Yes,
item.
yes.
So sorry, it's not part of our committee
Yes.
update, but in a general topic of something kind of we had discussed, was even possibly providing additional information around the option to have the DCA email address and what it means, right? And the impacts to individual board members around PRAs, right? And why, how and why it may or may not be helpful, right? Just to be able to weigh that decision and know that it is an option, so.
And just to comment on that, and I'd recommend that we bring that discussion to maybe the next Government Public
I think
Affairs
so.
Committee. Traditionally, what we've seen is sometimes like you'll have boards where it's like they're either all in or they're all using personal emails. If we want to do a hybrid where it's like only some want to opt in, that's fine. But I think we can discuss some pros and cons. One of the good things is, if there's interest from the board, I know, managing another email account is, a task in itself. But one of the things is if we can bring board members on board with DCA email addresses, it also kind of unlocks a little bit more of kind of possibilities for what we can share directly with the board, because we get you into the DCA kind of environment versus everything being external, going to Gmail accounts and things like that. So I'd like to bring
Let's
that
bring that.
discussion forward
Yeah.
to the board, and then we
Business
can update it in
Let's
January.
have that discussion, right?
So we'll gather that and bring it to that committee meeting, and
Yeah.
ultimately the board.
Letter, Barbara?
Yeah.
All right, and then on to kind of the final topic that we had covered in that meeting was going to be the pending regulation proposal to delegate certain functions to the executive officer. I wanted to kind of provide some insight, and just real quick insight before I hand it over to Ms.
Go
Walker.
ahead.
But wanted to, at least from my understanding of this, kind of as we were discussing it, my understanding is that the intention behind this update is, I believe back in 2016, right? I believe it was the requirements around the delegation of authority, and is how it's specifically to the executive officer. There wasn't DocuSign. That did not really, it wasn't there and available. So a lot of things had, if they were not there in person, things would not move forward. And so it would, my understanding is the intention of this is really to allow that more flexibility, so that even if they're not in person, things can still happen. You may no longer need that kind of additional person to act as backup, kind of per regs, but it allows the flexibility for staff to be able to kind of electronically escalate and change processes. And some of the questions that I did have around this during that meeting was, what is it gonna look like internally in terms of delegation processes? And a lot of it, and we can kind of get into it, would be even related to duty statements of staff, to say, this is who is in charge of this, and right, it would actually be very deliberate. So one, it would be deliberate in terms of who's doing what, because it's in the duty statement, not necessarily in regulation, right? So that way, it's documented, there's a trail, but we don't have to go through the legislative or regulatory process to, what's it called? I would say, manage internal workflow, essentially. So that is kind of my, and also intention is there to provide guardrails to the process as well. Now, I'll let Ms. Walker go into the detail of the different types of scenarios this entails, right? Where we're gonna find, are the different scenarios that we're gonna find ourselves where this is gonna be applied, I guess I should say. So I will hand it over.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And you summarized it quite well. So the way this regulatory proposal initially came to be, it centers all around those 2016 discussions of the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, CPEI regulatory proposal. And it started out with the purpose of a proposal being that the board could delegate additional functions to the executive officer that are more procedural in nature. to expedite our disciplinary action cases. It came about, CPEI has been around now a little over 10 years, and it came down from reports saying boards are taking too long to take disciplinary action, and there are certain things that could be expedited that don't require going through the full formal mail vote process, that you could delegate additional authority to the executive officer and take care of some of those businesses. So there was language developed around that. And then it had kind of morphed a little bit as the board continued to talk about it, about really providing additional recognition, if you will, to the assistant executive officer and formally, noting them as the executive officer's designee. And then in December of 2020, the board had approved additional language that would make some conforming changes to our citation program. We've got in statute, it specifically says your citation program must include certain provisions. Our regulations didn't include those, so we inserted that language, went to the board in December of 2020 and was approved. Well, then we get to the point of, as staff is working through kind of the backlog of packages and getting ready to write justifications and put that package together, a lot of questions came to mind of necessity on certain things that were in that 2020 language, as well as the other thing that was coming to mind was there's a few other things that we could add that would be even more beneficial if we had the authority to do so. So that's outlined in the meeting materials, and I'm going to briefly just summarize them. But as far as the delegation of authority for the executive officer is adding additional authority to for the executive officer to order licensee examinations pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 820 when we suspect either order a mental or physical examination when we suspect there may be a problem with licensee. This is really a function of kind of the investigative phase, and those are fully vetted through the Attorney General's office that drafts the order mandating that requirement. So it's not something simply that would be generated by the executive officer. It does get vetted through the Attorney General's office, who provides oversight and determines whether or not it's appropriate to proceed with that order. But under our current procedure, it actually requires that I file a petition so that the board chair can approve that order. So it would be much more efficient if I had that authority to just pursue those orders with the concurrence and approval of the Attorney General's office. And then we also added the ability to issue default decisions to the language. The reason being, after we file an accusation, if a licensee fails to file a notice of defense, we proceed with a default decision. Currently, the board chair has to sign those orders, and then we serve them. We could gain some additional efficiency if I had the authority to just issue the orders myself, because the licensee, upon being served with that default decision, still has the same rights to request that decision be set aside and that they can have a hearing. It just eliminates that additional step of having to have the board chair sign that order versus staff being able to process it. And by staff, I mean me able to sign that order. The next recommendation that we had that came through in that language was to remove that further delegation to the assistant executive officer where it appears throughout the language. The reason being, as Ms. Cruz highlighted, when this language came to be in 2016, if the executive officer wasn't physically present, enforcement in some cases would come to a halt because you can't file accusations, you can't make certain decisions on negotiating terms because you'd have to be physically present to be able to answer the phone call or be able to sign the document. Now that we've modernized quite a bit, we no longer really have that need. You can access and e-sign documents from anywhere in the world. We've been working electronically with the Attorney General's office for a few years now, and it works very well. And then we already have mechanisms in place if there was some extended absence of the executive officer to be able to appoint an acting that would step in and fulfill that role. So it's a matter of no longer having that need. And then when it came into the citation language and the letter of admonishment, our existing language works just great. We have language that says the executive officer or their designee issues a citation or a letter of admonishment. You don't need to mess with something that's working just fine for us. By making it the assistant executive officer, that eliminates our ability for our enforcement manager to issue those orders, which actually increases our workload. It doesn't make it more efficient. So with that, we're requesting that we leave the language as is, just update for more gender neutral pronouns. But other than that, just leave it as is. We also, that in the previous language, there was a proposed subdivision B that really outlined a lot of functions that are really just duties of the executive officer. And this is another thing that Ms. Cruz was highlighting, there's no need to put it in regulations. That's what duty statements are for. It's already an expectation that it's being done, but it doesn't need to be a regulation. So that was the thought there, is remove that and just continue to focus on discipline. Because really the purpose behind this section is to focus on delegating certain disciplinary functions to the executive officer. So keep it on that topic, eliminate language we don't need. Let me see here. And then, so by doing that, we're removing a couple sections entirely from the proposal because we don't need to make any changes to them. And then the final thought on that is now, the reason they were intertwined together was that we were making the assistant executive officer the designee. Now they really can stand alone as two separate proposals. So the staff recommendation is really, if you look in within the meeting materials, it is attachments. Let me see here. So attachment 2 with the text with all the track changes and the highlight, that was what was approved in 2020. Staff's recommendation for today is going to be to rescind the board's prior order that was approving that language and instead proceed with regulatory text that can be found in attachments 3 and 4. And then we would pursue those as two separate proposals, just to, once again, hopefully increase the speed through which we can get them through the OAL process. And I'm just going to glance through that language real quick to make sure I didn't miss any points. And beyond that, I'm going to share, our regulatory council has some very specific language if the board agrees and wants to move forward with. So I'm going to read that language, and if somebody would want to follow with so moved, you'd be welcome to do that so that you don't have to read it yourself. So let me double check here. So yeah, so in attachment 3, that's our proposed text for section 306. This has been vetted through legal counsel, actually 2 levels, so it's ready for approval today. And then we've got our standalone language there. Attachment 4 is for our citation program. And most of these changes, as you'll see, are really just to make sure that the regulations are in conformance with our statute, and then just to make it simpler for the person involved in the disciplinary process to understand timeframes. Right now, when we issue a citation, the timeframe for you to request a hearing versus an informal conference are 2 different time periods starting on 2 different dates. So it makes it extremely complicated for people to understand their appeal rights. Instead, we would just be keeping it consistent with 1 date. So I guess I probably could start with if there's any questions on it, and then I can read the language.
So you will not have to get sign off from the chair or from a member of the board on some of these things?
Yeah, it's on the, it would be on what's outlined in attachment 3. It would be to pursue the order of examination under Business and Professions Code section 820. The next portion where it's just talking about prosecuting accusations and statement of issues, that's just clarifying authority that I would already have. But then it adds authority to issue default decisions and to approve settlement agreements for the revocation, surrender, or interim suspension of a license. So that would be what it's being added. So it'd be being able to order an examination, being able to issue a default decision, or being able to proceed with a decision when the licensee agrees to either revoke or surrender their license. Go ahead.
Oh, so I had a question on that. I just want to understand it. So on the revocation and the surrender, on the previous one, you said it was vetted through the AG office. So can you just give me what that looks like? I mean, the way it reads is sort of that the EO would have the ability just to sign a revocation or surrender without the board even knowing about it.
So the board will know about it. It'll just be it would be a notification that the action occurred versus having a mail vote to need the board to approve it by delegating the additional authority. What it all looks like in practice is any of these powers that are in here are all vetted through the Attorney General's office. So you file, if it's an examination, we file the request with the Attorney General's office for them to approve it and then order that the person be examined. That's one separate process that's really an investigation phase, similar to the interim suspension order. So sometimes when we have a case, say we have a sexual misconduct case and we file it with the Attorney General's office, and then we say we want an accusation and we want a suspension order until the matter's final so that they can't continue to practice or harm practitioners. If during that process and we're pursuing that suspension order, if the respondent agrees through a settlement or not a settlement, but a stipulation, they agree to be placed on suspension, it wouldn't require any further action from the board. They would just be suspended until the outcome of the hearing. If the outcome of that decision ends up being that the person agrees to either revoke or surrender their license, what this language would allow for the executive officer to just process that decision without having to have a mail vote for the board on whether or not you approve of the person basically revoking or surrendering their license. So the stipulated settlements where you're putting somebody on probation with specific terms, where it's very case specific, would still require the same process it currently has. It's just when somebody is exiting the profession.
How would that apply to the current situation where we have the ability to pull something and then discuss it in closed session?
It would remove that for cases where the person has already agreed to either revoke or surrender their license. Those are cases where generally you don't tend to pull them. The only real kind of mechanism there that could be up for discussion is around costs. And we've had discussions about not cutting costs anymore on disciplinary cases. And I follow all of the guidance on the board, so I wouldn't adopt something where I had cut costs. And we can also put additional things in disciplinary guidelines. But it's removing the cases where someone's agreed to have their license revoked or surrendered from the
So
mail vote process.
is that really what this is about then? Is that, I mean, I'm just thinking, I mean, I know you, so my first thought is, you don't strike me as someone that abuses their power.
Yeah,
But when I see language like this, it does scare me a little bit, because that's giving a lot of power to an executive person.
yeah,
That if there was somebody of a different, personality or whatever, that I could see this being, like, well, hey, I have the power to do this, and, tough.
and that's,
Well, I would have felt differently if I'd have known more of the facts and been able to weigh in on the level that we can now, at least. If I don't, I feel like right now, when I look at a mail vote, and I look at all the information that you send out, and I read it, I can get a sense of, okay, that makes sense to me. Sometimes I'm gonna go, I feel like I wanna look at this a little bit closer, have a discussion with other board members, get their insight, because maybe it's gonna help me understand. Like, I think of that one case that we had where the guy was being very evasive in our petition, and we're like, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden we find out, well, there's a soft admittance, and then there's a hard admittance, and that was never clarified. So
Yeah.
when Sabina took the time to explain that to us, I went, okay, now I get it. I understand, because that was, I don't know anybody else on the board, but that was a frustrating moment for me,
You and I were both.
asking questions and somebody being evasive, and I'm saying, well, wait a second. I even think you got a little frustrated, which is rare. But, why, I thought this was already decided, in a sense. You admitted to something. Well, I didn't exactly, it was very interesting for me. So I'm just looking at it from a standpoint of, yeah, I'm great with you, but, as much as I'd love for you to be on this board for 20 years, that may not be your plan.
yeah.
And I'm not gonna be here in 20 years or, even 5 years from now.
So I'd like to actually respond to 2 comments on that and 2 points, because that's the reasoning behind actually some of these changes. Not that I don't trust Tammy, but that's also a lot of the reason behind some of the recommendations for removing that additional authority that would have then gone to the assistant executive officer. The executive officer reports directly to the board. If they do something inappropriate, you have the ability to fire them with like 3 days notice and just call a meeting. So you have that tool. That doesn't extend to civil service staff in the role of an assistant executive officer. So that's a legitimate concern there if you're gonna extend that. So that was part of the reasoning and my uncomfort with Section 306. And it's nothing on our current staff, but like you said, you don't know in the future who you end up in certain roles. You don't want to put yourself in a bad position. And we see how infrequently regulations get updated. So you can't move fast enough if you make a mistake.
Exactly.
So that was behind that. Your point about, so for the revoked and surrendered licenses, that was in the prior language and has just been coasting along since 2016. If the board isn't okay with that, it can be removed. It's something that was part of the CPEI proposal from 10 years ago, is to really to enhance the authority of the executive officer so that we can more effectively take disciplinary action faster by eliminating those additional processes, but
I mean, I'm all for efficiency and for
Yeah.
moving faster, obviously.
yeah.
You know, I mean, that's been one of our big tenets, I think, this last year, is that we wanted to get down to business and get it going. So I'm all for that. I'm thinking about that one extra step that does include us where we can ask for that little bit more. And I don't know that I would want to lose that per se. Thinking forward, not only now, but also thinking after I'm gone.
And can I just follow up on that? So, because I agree with some of those sentiments. So, I mean, you did mention some notification to the board. You know, what would that notification look like? Would it still be the same breadth of information that we get in a mail vote? Or was it just, here's what happened in a one line?
No, the same documents. So the same accusation and the same disciplinary decision. The other thing is just granting the authority doesn't mean we have to use it. So we could, further define, you could still vote on it. You could still be a mail vote, or if it looks contentious. But really, it's to get the mechanism of like a lot of cases, and like where I could see it being really beneficial for us. You get repeat criminal cases where it's your second insurance fraud conviction. You're out. There's no discretion. There's nothing for us to do on it other than we know they're going to have to either be revoked or surrendered for a minimum of 10 years. That current process still requires, that we file an accusation, we get that document, we coax them into settling so that we don't have to go through an expensive hearing for an outcome that's really already determined. Then we get those documents, and instead of at that point being able to issue the order and then remove them from the profession within 30 days, we have to do the mail vote process. You're being tasked with reviewing those documents with an additional deadline that if you non-adopt, what are you going to do with it? Because there's no other choice.
Right.
So that's kind of the point, is trying to, where there's nothing else to do on it, being able to have that authority. But I totally understand the kind of the
Well, I
concern.
get that scenario, but you're having the opportunity to explain it to me,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That, I'm just thinking in terms of if we don't have that opportunity, and I'm not a legal mind enough. I leave that to you, legal minds that,
Yeah.
that I know enough maybe to be dangerous to ask the questions and realize that, but, my gut tells me, maybe having some of that, and I don't know, maybe it's more of a notification ahead of time. Here's the circumstance. I don't know. I'm just thinking that one extra, if anybody else wants to chime in,
Yeah, I
on
mean,
along that.
I
those
mean, I
lines.
shared your concerns when I read it, and again, same sentiments, no problem with you.
Yeah.
But, you don't know. And the way you just explained it now, I mean, is this language specific to cases that there is nothing else to do?
No, it's not.
And so I think that's
Mhm.
at least where Dr. Adams and I are hung up on a little bit. If there's nothing else to do, I mean, that's clear, because I want to make it as efficient as possible. I mean, we've been working to, get things moving along.
Yeah.
But again, there's just a little nugget of concern
Yeah.
with the ones that there could be something else to do. So I don't know if.
And just to kind of to add on that, it's really on the staff perspective. I know that there's more to the cases, but when we get through a case where we file an accusation and the person basically agrees to give up their license, and they very rare, but occasionally if they agree to let us revoke their license, at that point, that's generally not the cases where we see a lot of issues where it's like we need to hold them, we need to talk about them, because the person's already agreed, whether they're soft or hard admissions, they've agreed they've done something wrong, they're not going to work anymore. And that's really the only cases that are covered under this language. It does not apply to the cases where we see the most things that need to be held, which is when there's some sort of contention, it goes to a hearing, there's a proposed decision. Nothing that goes to a proposed decision, even if the proposed decision is to revoke, would apply under this language. It's simply for a stipulation where both parties have agreed that this is the best outcome, is that we either revoke or surrender your license. So there's that distinction. But understand, we could.
Well, you're right. I mean, on the rare instances that we have polled, it's usually been somebody on the committee is either saying, you know, this person should be, this person should have their license revoked, not just, it's more usually the other way than it is, you know, less. It's
Right.
usually, this is pretty egregious. Why is this person only getting 3 years or 5 years probation? This person should be, you know, not practicing. So, and maybe, that's what I'm saying, it's
Yeah,
that rare,
it's-
it's that rare 1 or 2 times that,
Yeah.
or, you know, however many times it's happened. I mean, we pulled what, since I've been on the board 3 years, we've pulled
Just a
maybe,
handful.
maybe a handful.
Yeah.
But those handfuls, it was very informative
Mhm.
for me to, to have that discussion with the other board members and get their, and getting insight from, you know, legal counsel too, in
Mhm.
those moments.
But I think, Ms. Walker, you're saying that the situations that we typically have pulled didn't come from situations where there was a stipulation in place, right?
Correct,
That's
yeah,
what you're saying.
for the board to be, you know, and I completely agree, and it's like making sure that we can, you know, you get all the same documents you would see in advance, but the circumstances that would be where you would give up the ability under these cases would be one where the person had the accusation filed against them, they've agreed, I've done something wrong, I'm either gonna let you revoke my license. What typically happens is that they say they're gonna surrender their license, and then under our current process, it goes to a mail vote, and it would require a board member to say, no, we're not gonna let them surrender their license, and then it's to do what, and the
Right,
only
yeah,
real,
right.
I'll get to you in
Oh,
just
yes,
one second. The only factor that I'm seeing that gets, when you get to a surrender, that could be some reason why the board may wanna revisit it, has to do with costs. So whether you wanted to, we could add additional language that, you know, it's a revocation or surrender with full cost recovery, if you're comfortable with that, but it would really require the board to just decide that they don't want someone to surrender their license, and that's where it kind of, it's
Right.
not the ones that we're seeing. The ones that we see the most common are, that get held is whether it's, you know, stipulated settlement, and it's like the terms aren't quite right, we either want them stronger or less, or it's a proposed decision, it's like this decision isn't quite right, we want to revisit and see the whole record. But we've, you know, to my knowledge, I don't think we've even held a surrender.
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, what I'm hearing is the kind of the language hang up of kind of the gap is really around either voluntary licensee, what's it called, revocation of surrender, or voluntary license, or licensee admission, right? I feel like that I'm not sure if an addition of that type of clarification would help or hurt, but I feel like that's kind of where the hang up, kind of where we keep circling around here.
It could be, and then, you know, I just like to, you know, I think I made this point, I think a few times, just when I talk to the board members, but when it comes to the admissions, I totally understand what happened during that petition hearing, but for purposes of like public protection, the outcome is exactly the same, whether it's a hard admission or a soft admission. So I would just recommend or caution against
type of
maybe
language.
being too caught up on the hard admissions, because I've yet to see a single case where anybody that was represented by counsel actually signed a hard admissions. They don't. Anybody, you know, they pretty much know that they want to get the soft admissions, because you know, the outcome for us is the same, and protection for the public, we still get them out of the profession. It's just you don't have the affirmative, yes, I did everything that's in that accusation. It's more, I agree, you can make the case, I'm gonna move on.
So, Ms. Walker, for me, it's clarified, the one remaining part is you mentioned the cost recovery.
Mhm.
I mean, I assume the executive officer would have cost recovery, you know, in mind when signing these.
Mhm.
So can you just explain that a little, like, the difference a little bit more as far as, you know, we have this, but with the exclusion of cost recovery cases, or however you were saying it?
Yeah, it's like if there was, really your negotiating tools when you're looking at a revocation or a surrender it's the 2 points, because just about all of the other language is just template language that we insert in an order. One of the issues is around admissions, whether it's hard or soft. The other one is how much are they gonna have to pay in cost recovery. When we do stipulated surrenders, we always include the full cost recovery. We know that we can't collect it until if and when they decide to come back, but we generally reflect all those costs. Maybe on a rare occasion, it might get reduced if it was just exorbitant costs, or maybe we spent a lot of time investigating something, but truly, you know, it's not reflective of what that person's burden should be. But for the most part, those costs are fully just listed in the decision. If the board was more comfortable with limiting authority to only the cases where that order includes full cost recovery, we could work on language to that effect. But there's more negotiation around costs when it comes to stipulated settlements to put somebody on probation. It's usually when you kind of, you get into a settlement conference with a judge and they're like, well, you know, they kind of pressure you a little bit to drop your costs a little bit.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you being open to hearing what I had to say and
Yeah.
others, so appreciate it. It's clarified a lot for me.
Any other discussion, questions?
You more comfortable? Yeah?
I am, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so, based on the idea that these are stipulated, you know, that makes me a lot more comfortable when both sides are agreeing to something already. And there, you know, obviously, there's situations with discretion, that I think we kind of want to have some input sometimes, but it sounds like in those situations where both sides are agreeing to it, that there isn't a whole lot for us to do other than the cost recovery issue, which, you know, I think the EO, as well as the rest of us, are motivated to get the best recovery, cost recovery as well. So I'm more comfortable with it.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone else? No? Well, I thank you for clarifying. I have been for days in my brain trying to figure out how seemingly we were looking for flexibility in number 4 and we were looking for inflexibility in number 2. And I hadn't made sense of that until you explained it to me just now. So thank you for that. Okay. So can we read that proposed motion again, and if anyone on the board would.
So legal counsel made some slight edits to what you see in the materials. So I would propose that I'll read their updated language that they'd like us to use, and then if there's any agreement, someone could say so moved and second, or we can kind of go from there on modifying the motion if that's where it's going to go. But it's probably easiest if I just read it for everyone to have. So the motion, or recommended motion, from staff is to rescind the board's October 2020 order to initiate a rulemaking for this proposal relating to sections 306 and 390.4 to 390.5 of the California Code of Regulations, Title 16, and approve the newly proposed regulatory text for sections 306 and 390.4 to 390.5 presented at this meeting. The board authorizes initiation and possible adoption of new text as follows. Approve the proposed regulatory text for sections 306 and 390.4 to 390.5, Division 4 of Title 16 of the California Code of Regulations. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at section 306 and 390.4 to 390.5, Division 4 of Title 16 of the California Code of Regulations as noticed.
I think the attorney should.
I'll make the motion that was just described.
I'll second.
Who was that? It was Mr. Sweet and then Dr. Daniels. Thank you.
I mean,
Yes,
I
sir.
would recite it all from memory, but I think you all heard it.
Could you do that again? No.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear that.
Is there any further discussion, questions from the board?
I did have one more question.
Sure.
Have any of the other healing arts boards adopted language like this?
Yes, that's where the language that you see there comes from. A lot of the healing arts boards already have this language, and then this language specifically, I believe we modeled it after the dental board in California, but a lot of the other programs already have this same authority.
That helps me as well.
Hearing no further discussion from the board, I would open agenda item number 12, and the motion as presented in the full committee report for any public comment. Hearing and seeing none. Mr. Sweet, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
Dr. Paris?
Yes.
Dr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Sweet, yes. Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
And Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. You know, the best teams always run at some level of, at the speed of trust. So I appreciate that we have that here. Okay, do we need to take a full hour for staff? Is that?
We don't need to, we can take as much time as, much
For
or little
lunch,
time.
would, I'm open to
40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes.
30, yeah, 30 is fine. 30, yeah.
30 minutes is
30,
okay?
40, yeah,
Is
I
that,
don't-
can we go 45? Is that okay? I
Yeah.
mean, just
45?
round number?
46.
Round number? I don't know what's available here, what we have to do to
There's
actually
a
get lunch, so.
cafeteria.
Do we? Oh, we
Okay.
do?
If it's, yeah, if it's open,
Is it
no
open?
one's here. Yeah, there's a cafeteria, just like diagonal. They have like salads and sandwiches and,
So it's like within a couple minutes walk?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's like on campus.
I'm fine with whatever time.
So it's,
I'm fine
that,
with shorter the better.
45.
that clock that we're staring at, that the public can't see, but we're staring at a clock across the hall here, that's a little bit fast. It's 12:41 right now. Can we come back and reconvene at 1:30?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone. We'll
Okay, thank
see everyone back here at 1:30.
Cool.